Our story begins with a young man who, less than 3 minutes after being diagnosed with a terminal illness, watches his three incredibly wealthy sisters vote to kick him out of the house instead of seeking treatment. Later, of course, once they see him reunited with his biological sister, they will all regret it, weeping and begging for him to return to their side. But by then, as we shall see, it was already far too late. In this moment, he is still listening to the doctor's ultimatum, hearing the grim news that his situation likely won't last more than a year. His mind went completely blank, and his legs, acting out of pure habit, carried him out of the hospital. A vibration in his pocket caused him to pull out his phone instinctively. Upon seeing his eldest sister's name on the screen, his heart was suddenly moved. He hadn't expected her to remember his call, and though she often grew angry with him for no reason, her concern in this moment was enough for him. "Sister," the doctor said, but he didn't even have time to finish his sentence before Muyalu interrupted him with total impatience. She told him it didn't matter if the doctor saw him or not. She was calling to say his biological mother had been found, so he should stop calling them sisters. She warned him never to return to their family, stating coldly that Muyalu was never truly their younger brother. Muyalu's words contained no attempt at concealment whatsoever. Her tone was icy, filled with a very clear sense of disgust. In doing so, she resolved the doubts that had tormented him for years. His eldest sister is the authoritative president of Jianshan's leading company. His second sister is a top-tier star, a true diva of the music world. Muyalu assumed that after clarifying all of this, he would simply break down because of the vast difference in their status. She expected him to scream hysterically, which would allow her to use an even colder tone to force him to face reality. It would make her feel happier, to be honest, to ensure he knew they didn't belong to the same world. But he simply accepted it all in silence, a reaction that left the person on the other end of the phone completely stunned. But that shock lasted only for an instant. After all, this simply saved her from having to deal with any further problems. Muyalu immediately dismissed those thoughts from her mind, moving on without a second look. She began preparing herself to welcome her biological brother back into the fold. As for what this substitute brother might be thinking, well, to be honest, no one cared in the slightest. After that ruthless phone call, the housekeeper, Lu, knocked and entered to deliver her outfit for the gala dinner in a few days. Every garment was crafted by the very best designers, and the accessories alone cost a staggering 7 figures. Seeing such luxury caused the tiny bit of remorse Muyalu felt to vanish instantly. She told herself that letting someone who never belonged in high society experience years of privilege was more than enough. In her mind, the Mu family owed absolutely nothing to him, to Mu Chun. "Housekeeper, I'd like some noodle soup," she stated, as if nothing had happened. She asked him to prepare it in the usual way. Housekeeper Lu hesitated for a moment upon hearing this, but nodded immediately. Barely 15 minutes later, Lu returned and brought the noodles to her. Muyalu took only a single bite before her expression soured. She immediately frowned and looked at old Lu. "Did you check the kitchen ingredients today?" she asked, and Lu understood her dissatisfaction at once. He had originally thought it was just a simple bowl of noodles that any cook could prepare. But reality proved that his judgment was quite wrong, which, naturally, was becoming a bit of a theme. Muyalu was clearly very unhappy with the taste of this particular dish. Housekeeper Lu thought for a moment before offering his response. "There is no problem with the ingredients, miss," he assured her. "I checked them all. Perhaps it is because the young master always prepared the noodles before, so the flavor is different now." "I see. The noodles have become a bit of a problem," Housekeeper Lu muttered. "I will go and ask the cook to adjust the flavor immediately." But Muyalu stopped Housekeeper Lu right then and there. Her curiosity piqued. "What exactly do you mean by that? I've been having these noodles for breakfast for over a year now." "Were all those noodles made by him?" she asked, and Housekeeper Lu nodded, giving her a firm affirmative. This revelation left Muyalu utterly stunned for a moment. To be honest, she hadn't expected that. Then, her tone shifted, becoming slightly reproachful toward the old man. "Muyalu, it doesn't matter what you say now, but even back then, how could you let him do that kind of work?" she demanded, clearly bothered by the breach of protocol. Housekeeper Lu hurried to explain, reminding her that for a long time, she hadn't been herself. She'd had a stomach ailment and couldn't eat a thing. Mu Chun had worked tirelessly for days to perfect these noodles just so she would eat. Muyalu simply waved her hand upon hearing this. It was, quite surprisingly, the very first time she was hearing of the matter. However, she felt only the slightest touch of emotion, a fleeting shadow of a feeling. She soon decided it was only natural. Compared to what the Mu family had given him, a bowl of noodles was nothing at all. And so, we return to the present, where Mu Chun had finally arrived at his biological mother's house. On the way there, he noticed the lampposts and trees near the modest home. They were covered in missing person posters. "It's this room," a voice said. The voice of his mother, Su Willen, trembled slightly as she spoke to him. The room wasn't large by any means, but we can see it was kept perfectly clean. The table was carefully covered with a white tablecloth, decorated with delicate blue orchids. It was the room with the best light in the entire house, a small, bright sanctuary for a son who had finally come home. It was a room that had been kept especially for him, a space reserved just for his return. His eyes grew misty in an instant. He realized then that his mother had never once stopped searching. This house, modest as it was, had always held a place for him in its heart. Deep down, he felt that he finally had a real home again. At noon, his little sister, who was still in elementary school, sat with them, though she was too overwhelmed to eat. And so, we see them begin to share the home-cooked meal they had both longed for over the years. His mother, Sue Willen, simply watched him for a long, long time, as if making sure he was real. She remembered how, in the days following his disappearance, her world had lost all distinction between day and night. Back then, he hardly stopped for even a single moment. She had posted thousands of flyers in every corner of the city, yet her phone had never once rung. Sometimes, passing by the shops on the street, she felt as though she could see his face reflected in every window. "How wonderful," she whispered. "We have finally found you." His sister, Sujyeon-won, watched the rare smile on her mother's face and couldn't help but blink in stunned silence. Then, seeing the joy in the room, she also began to smile happily. After they finished lunch, Sujyeon-won sensibly gathered the dishes and headed toward the kitchen. She rolled up her sleeves and began washing the plates with practiced, skillful movements. Seeing this, Muchin quickly stood up to help her, and they began washing the dishes together. "Thank you, brother," she said, a word she hadn't dared to utter during the meal, but finally found the courage to say. Hearing her call him brother made him feel an immediate sense of peace and warmth. In the Grandmu mansion, even sitting on the same sofa, it had felt like they lived in two different worlds. In that moment, Muchin made a firm decision that, in the little time he had left, his mother and sister would never face hardship again. That night, before going to bed, he received a voice message from his mother asking if he had enjoyed the home-cooked meal. She told him that tomorrow, she planned to buy some ribs to stew for them both. With a smile, he sent a voice message back, simply telling her that it sounded perfect. He called her mom, a word that Sue Willen listened to with pure fascination as tears began to fall. She had secretly feared he might look down on such a poor home, but now, those insecurities had vanished completely. There were many good days ahead, she told herself. Meanwhile, the next morning, Muyalu woke up at her usual hour. The moment the mistress of the house woke, the entire cleaning staff sprang into action, each following a strict, minute-by-minute schedule. And so, barely 5 minutes later, her makeup artist arrived at the room with perfect, calculated punctuality. While her face was being prepared, she thought about her younger brother, Mu Xian, who was about to return to the country. She felt she had to get rid of all of Mu Chin's old things before he arrived, so her brother wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But almost immediately, a rather confusing question arose in her mind. Where exactly was Mu Chin's room located in this vast estate? 10 minutes later, we see Muyalu following the butler out of the main building to find the answer. The crystal-clear lake reflected the beautiful scenery, with soft grass stretching into the distance under the shade of tall poplar trees. It was a perfect scene of birdsong and floral fragrance, the result of 3 gardeners earning over $1 million a year. Quite a bargain, really. Muyalu secretly thought that without her luck, she could never live in such luxury, even if she worked for 100 years. But as they continued walking, she suddenly realized that something felt very wrong about their direction. "Old Lu," she said, "I asked you to take me to Mu Chin's room, not out here." The butler, Old Lu, simply nodded and gestured ahead with his white-gloved hand toward the edge of the property. "The place where young Master Mu Xian used to live is right here," the butler explained calmly. Muyalu was left utterly stunned upon hearing this. Wasn't that building where the servants lived? Then, suddenly, she remembered that she herself had personally organized this arrangement many years ago. Back then, she had decided he wasn't truly a member of the family, and if she allowed him to experience such luxury so young, it was highly likely he would grow up to be a wasteful spendthrift, even if the Mu family was vast and wealthy. She didn't want the family to lose face because of his actions, so she made the choice to raise him in poverty first. But, after so many years, had he really never mentioned the possibility of changing rooms? Muyalu found it hard to believe. She had never truly considered him a younger brother, or she wouldn't have forgotten where he lived. But no matter what, he was still her brother in name, at the very least. If he had only taken the initiative to ask back then, how could she not have moved him to a better room? Old Lu, the butler, seemed to hesitate deeply upon hearing her words. In all these years, he, as an outsider, could clearly see the deep-rooted contempt Muyalu felt toward the boy. Whenever Mu Chun tried to share his school achievements or joy, she would mercilessly interrupt him before he could even speak. Even when the butler tried to report on the boy's affairs, he was often severely scolded and ordered to be silent. Old Lu understood perfectly that, growing up in that environment, the sensible boy preferred to suffer in silence. Muyalu seemed to realize something from the butler's expression, but an arrogant person like her would never admit it. She told herself it didn't matter now. After all, he had already been kicked out of the house. Besides, those servant quarters were still much better than the conditions of an average middle-class family, or so she claimed. And so, we see Muyalu continuing on, still insisting that she simply didn't want to see him anymore. Old Lu, the eldest servant of the family, led the way directly toward the building where Mu Chun used to live. She stood there completely stunned as she descended the stairs, never having imagined that this nominal young master actually lived in the basement. Her first instinct was to severely reprimand Butler Lou, but then, a flood of memories from the past rushed back to her. We learned that the butler had originally assigned the boy a guest room in the main building all those years ago. However, she had flatly refused the proposal, harshly ordering him to go and live in the north building instead. But the north building, as it turned out, was entirely occupied by the household servants. Since she didn't want to see him, and there were no extra rooms, he was tucked away here, though the furniture was, at least, complete. But as soon as Muyulu stepped into the room, she felt a damp, biting chill, and for the first time, a flicker of remorse touched her heart. The place where her brother had lived for years was worse than a common servant's quarters, she realized, as she began to look through his things. In a drawer, Muyulu discovered a collection of relics, a broken remote control car, old building blocks, and a watch that had long since stopped ticking. At first, she looked down on him for keeping such worthless junk, but as she inspected the watch, she froze in surprise. If her memory served her correctly, it seemed this was a trinket she had carelessly tossed to him many years ago. She hadn't expected that even after the watch broke, he would still cherish it like a priceless treasure. This led Muyulu to realize that the other items in the drawer were likely also discarded gifts from his sisters. It truly hadn't occurred to her that what she had dismissed so casually back then would hold such immense weight in his heart. She had intended to throw it all away as trash, but moved by a sudden guilt, she looked again and found a scholarship application form. She frowned, feeling a new sense of confusion rising within her. "Old Lou," she asked, "didn't I instruct you to give him a monthly allowance for his expenses?" She couldn't understand how he could be so poor that he felt the need to apply for a scholarship. To her, it seemed absurd that someone living under the Mu family roof would go to school seeking such a small amount of money. It would look as though the family was mistreating him, but then she remembered her own decision to raise him in poverty first. We see that the money she provided for his expenses wasn't the standard for a wealthy family, but rather that of a common one, about $2,000 a month. However, even if it were only $2,000, she told herself he shouldn't be so poor that he'd need to apply for a scholarship. Butler Lou, upon hearing this, quickly lowered his head to offer an explanation. He explained that he had transferred the $2,000 for monthly expenses exactly on time, every single month. But then he revealed that young Master Mukin had secretly asked to borrow a sum of money, claiming it was urgent to prepare a birthday gift. At the time, the butler's heart ached for the boy, and he told him there was no need to pay the money back. But soon enough, the young master gathered the funds anyway and returned them, which, naturally, was likely the reason for his poverty. Hearing this, Muyulu suddenly realized that over the years, every time she celebrated a birthday, he had carefully prepared a gift for her. But since those gifts were bought from humble street stalls, she had never given them a second thought. Generally, she would throw them in the trash the very next day, forgetting from her high position that Mukin was never truly treated as a young master. To be honest, those cheap, valueless items were simply the very best gifts he could possibly afford. As it happened, the next morning, we see that I crossed paths with Muyulu by chance. Upon seeing me, her expression turned to one of shock. She called out for me to wait, but I didn't listen and didn't stop at all. This caused a fair amount of consternation for Muyulu, who was still trapped in her own elevated stereotypes. In her mind, the image of her brother had always been one of total obedience to her every command. She couldn't understand why he would suddenly become so cold and indifferent toward her. Muyulu frowned, though she decided not to dwell on it for too long at that moment. Instead, she took an old storage box from her assistant's hands and approached. She told Mukin these were things from his old room, adding that there was also some less important clothing waiting in her car. She promised to send someone to his house later. Hearing this, I finally stopped my departure and opened a box at random. "Thank you, President Mu," he said. Before Muyulu could even react to such a formal title, she witnessed a scene that left her utterly stunned. He simply tossed the entire box into the trash. By the time she recovered from her shock, her former brother had already walked far away. Seeing this, Assistant Sun, who was standing by her side, spoke up with a voice full of indignation. "Sister Yulu," he began, "you even came all this way in person just to bring him his things." He continued, suggesting that all of this junk should simply be thrown away where it belongs. After all, the Mu family had raised him diligently for so many years, even allowing him to enter one of the country's top universities. One could certainly say they hadn't let him down in the slightest. And yet, he showed not a single shred of gratitude, even daring to display such a disagreeable attitude toward her. To the assistant, he was simply an ungrateful wolf who could never be tamed. But Muyula couldn't hear a single word he was saying right now. When she heard him call her President Mu, she felt as though she had lost something forever, though she couldn't quite name it. However, that indescribable feeling of loss was soon replaced by a wave of uncontrollable anger. In that moment, Muyulu felt she had finally seen his true face. It made her feel that the decision she and her sisters had made back at the university was the only logical path. The decision to kick him out was absolutely correct, she told herself, though she chose to selectively forget her own past behavior. She forgot how often she had pretended not to know him in public out of embarrassment, or how she had scolded him with an air of superiority. She had even forced him to call her President Mu on certain occasions, warning him that being called sister in public was shameful. Now that he was finally doing exactly what she had demanded, deep down, she felt 100 times more miserable. Assistant Sun, noticing the fury written across Muyalu's face, continued to add fuel to the fire. He remarked that since the boy didn't even care about his own reputation, they should ignore him when he inevitably came back to beg. He insisted that they should also turn their backs on him with total coldness. After all, others would kill to climb to such positions but never get the chance. In the future, he concluded, the boy would surely regret his actions to his very core. As Muyalu listened to these persuasions, we see the anger in her heart begin to dissipate just a little. The assistant was right, she told herself. He would definitely live to regret this one day. A moment later, Muyalu began to look through the bag the assistant was carrying. She remembered his medical history was inside and wanted to find it just to throw it all in the trash. Not long after, she found a pile of old documents tucked away in Assistant Sen's bag. Muyalu ignored her own information and began to skim through the old papers in a superficial, random way. Hidden within this pile of old documents were his university scholarship application and his report cards since childhood. When Muyalu saw these report cards, her eyes narrowed slightly. She truly hadn't expected his grades to be so high since he was a boy. He had been at the top of his class almost every single year, a detail she had apparently missed. On his university entrance exam, he had managed to score an impressive 680 points. That score of 680 points left Muyalu quite surprised, as she had never bothered to pay attention to his grades before. To be honest, she had always assumed he only got into such a prestigious university through other means. She thought it was thanks to the money the family donated every year, but now it seemed he had gotten in entirely on his own merit. Suddenly, and perhaps for the first time, Muyalu felt a small flicker of pity. Compared to the top student in the entire province, he really wasn't that far behind. Setting everything else aside, from the perspective of investing in talent, he was actually someone very much worth cultivating. But she told herself it was useless to dwell on it now. She simply couldn't allow herself to think about it anymore. She told herself she couldn't think too much about it. For as long as she had money, brilliant students like him would always be easy to find. As we watch her continue to search through the bag, Muyalu eventually came across several physical examination reports. To be honest, this seemed a bit ridiculous to her, and she wondered if he was simply terrified of death. He was still so young, yet he had already undergone so many medical checkups. She remembered hearing him mention something about his health during their phone call the previous day. Driven by a sudden spark of curiosity, she opened the report to see exactly what he had been looking for. It was a physical examination report from back when he was only 16 years old. After reading the contents of that old report, Muyalu was left absolutely stunned on the spot. The attending physician had clearly written that the patient reported frequent palpitations, fever, and gagging over the previous 2 weeks. Signs of malnutrition had appeared, and the final diagnostic result was liver cancer. Muyalu stood there completely dumbfounded as she processed what she was seeing. How was it even possible, she wondered, when every meal at the Mu Mansion was prepared by a professional nutritionist? How could there be malnutrition? But then she suddenly realized they never actually let him sit at the table with them. We return to a memory of a time long ago, when several of the sisters had returned to the mansion. He had worked closely with the housekeeper to specially prepare all the necessary ingredients. He had spent the entire day busy in the kitchen, preparing a massive spread of various dishes. That time, she had intended to let him sit at the table as an exception, but 2 important guests arrived at the last moment. She had asked him to give up his seat for the guests and go eat with the common staff instead. Now, looking back on that incident, she vaguely realized that something about the situation had been very different. Perhaps it was because he had always been such a docile and obedient person that she never noticed his struggle. In that moment, he hadn't shown even a hint of dissatisfaction, simply swallowing his complaints in silence. At the time, she hadn't seen any problem with it, but now she suddenly realized that after years of living together, she had developed some feelings for him. However, her prejudices were deeply rooted, and she had always considered him a complete outsider. She reasoned that even if he lived at a boarding school and ate with common people, he shouldn't have been hungry to the point of malnutrition. Her heart was filled with a strange mixture of confusion and misunderstanding. She decided to call the housekeeper, Lu, though this wasn't out of genuine concern or guilt. No, she simply wanted to interrogate the staff about what had happened back then. She wanted to know if they had been obedient and if they had handled things correctly. The call was connected quickly, and she asked her question with a cold, sharp tone. Housekeeper Lu remained silent for a moment on the other end before responding very cautiously. She explained that during that period, he often simply didn't have any time to eat. The housekeeper reminded her that she had given strict orders not to spoil him. This was supposedly to prevent him from developing bad habits and embarrassing the Mu family. She had demanded that he stay in line and live exactly like the common staff. But since the staff's meal times were fixed and he was always busy, he often missed his chance to eat. And so, he went hungry. Yet the more Muyalu heard, the more confused she became. She wondered what the connection was. Did he really have the nerve to throw a tantrum and refuse to eat on purpose? Muyalu snorted coldly, thinking that if he was truly degrading himself like that, it was entirely his own fault. She assumed the young master was just suffering from a bout of arrogance. Upon hearing this, housekeeper Lu could only offer a bitter smile before continuing her explanation. She asked if the housekeeper remembered a specific moment. Had he actually begged her to assign him a driver? Muyalu lowered her head, reflecting in silence for a moment after hearing the housekeeper's hesitant tone. And then, she vaguely recalled that such a thing had indeed happened once before. She wondered if she had been the one to actively propose the idea back then, or if it was his request. In reality, Muyalu had rejected the seemingly unreasonable request without a second thought. After all, she had long ago decided that raising him in poverty was the best way to build his character. The very idea of assigning him an exclusive driver seemed completely out of the question to her. At the time, she even suspected that he was simply letting his ego get the better of him. She assumed he just wanted to borrow the mansion's driver to show off, which, naturally, she wouldn't allow. She admitted there was such an incident, but she failed to see what any of that had to do with him not eating. She questioned if he was being spiteful, perhaps deliberately refusing to eat as a form of silent protest. Housekeeper Lu hurriedly shook her head, anxious to explain the reality of the situation. She revealed that he hadn't complained once. Instead, the very next day, he used his meager allowance to buy a bicycle. The high school was far from the mansion, and even by bike, it took over an hour to arrive on time each day. He had to wake up at 5:30 every morning, but the servants' meal times were strictly fixed between 7 and 9. This meant that every single morning when he left, the kitchen hadn't even started the fires yet. As for dinner, he often missed that too, exhausted by the heavy burden of his daily responsibilities. Deep down, housekeeper Lu felt a pang of genuine distress as she made this confession to her mistress. She had tried to bring up his lack of food many times, but Muyalu always impatiently cut her off, insisting no one receive special treatment. Hearing this, Muyalu felt as if she had been struck by lightning, finally realizing just how terribly wrong she had been. He had always been picked up and driven in luxury cars whenever he went out. It seems he had long ago forgotten the hardships faced by those below him. He always felt that children from ordinary families simply didn't deserve an exclusive driver. Naturally, he thought the request was irrational, completely ignoring that the distance from the mansion grounds to the high school was far too long. The boy's request was actually quite reasonable. Even without a car, they could have simply arranged for a cook to prepare his meals earlier. Any normal family would have adjusted to a child's schedule, but here, both paths were blocked by him. Muyalu now has to admit that the fact the boy fell ill from hunger was entirely his own fault. After hanging up, assistant Sun, who had been shouting madly just a moment ago, felt as if he'd been slapped, but in the end, the boy is just a fake. He can't truly be considered Muyalu's younger brother, after all. Even though Muyalu knew he was wrong, he was far too used to being above everyone else. It was absolutely impossible for him to bow his head and offer an apology. He decided it would be better to simply send someone else to deliver the items. Meanwhile, we returned to the Mu family mansion to see a different scene. A young woman was lying in bed, her skin as white as snow and as delicate as jade. No matter where she went, she was always the absolute center of attention. Her name is Mu Liao, a superstar queen whose new song recently dominated every major music platform. But despite her fame, Mu Liao suffered from terrible insomnia last night, and she fears this feeling is returning. Terrified of becoming a useless person who can't sleep, she began to bitterly recall how her insomnia was cured back then. Out of habit, she reached for her phone, wanting to call the boy to come and give her a massage. Her fingers paused for a moment. However, as the reality of the situation suddenly dawned on her, he was no longer in that house, having been kicked out by her and the other sisters, but his sadness was fleeting. After all, he was just an irrelevant stranger now that their real younger brother was about to return home. In her mind, what kind of system would allow a fake to remain in the house? She immediately called the housekeeper to find a masseuse, but she simply couldn't find that original feeling again. When he returned home exhausted, he found the living room dark, though warm dishes still sat on the table despite no one being in sight. At that moment, the whistle of a firework echoed, and a bright light suddenly flashed. "Happy birthday, brother." Su Huilon stepped out from behind the gift with a smile, firmly placing a birthday cake on the table. Su Xiaowan ran over excitedly, pulled off a cloth to reveal an electronic piano, and said she would play a song she had just learned for him. Beyond the surprise, he was also full of questions, as there had clearly been no piano in the living room when he came home yesterday. This wasn't exactly the kind of thing an ordinary family could just afford to buy on a whim. He soon found a clue. A small sticker from a secondhand piano shop was still stuck to the instrument. His nose suddenly began to sting with emotion, realizing what they had done just to celebrate his birthday. His sister had actually gone out of her way to borrow a piano for him. In all those long years with the Mu family, to be honest, no one had ever taken his birthday seriously. As we watch his sister's serious expression while she focused on playing the piano, he stood to the side, clapping with reddened eyes, while the sound of the piano followed the melody of her song. When the song finally ended, he gently rubbed her head and asked her a question. "Do you really like playing the piano that much? Just wait until your brother earns some money and buys one for you." Su Xiaowan was absolutely filled with joy upon hearing those words. The words, "thank you, brother," were about to burst from her mouth, but she forced herself to swallow them because she was a sensible girl. She blinked her large eyes and, as children often do, said the exact opposite of what she was actually thinking. She claimed she didn't actually like it that much, and since he couldn't read her mind, he simply smiled and didn't push her. He was already planning a grand surprise for her future, so he took the opportunity to change the subject. He thanked her, telling her he loved it, and then she insisted that he play a song for her as well. Su Xianwan opened her eyes wide in complete surprise at the suggestion. She asked him, with genuine wonder, if he actually knew how to play the piano too. Just as he sat down and prepared to show off his skills, there was a soft, unexpected knock at the door. He opened it and was instantly stunned to see a young woman wearing a white shirt and a short, flowing skirt. Her dark ponytail revealed the elegant line of her neck, looking very much like a swan. A gentle breeze blew, softly catching the loose strands of hair framing her face. When she saw him open the door, a sweet, knowing smile curled at the corners of her lips. It seemed quite clear that this girl hadn't knocked on the wrong door by mistake. She held out an elegant gift box with both hands, offering it to him. She wished Mukin a happy birthday, but he just stood there, completely frozen and unable to react. She tilted her head and asked playfully why he wasn't inviting his good friend inside to sit down. As it turns out, she had been his classmate back in high school. She had heard about his recent troubles through their group and deliberately chose to come to his door today. Su Xianwan looked at the beautiful visitor and then at her stunned brother, a mischievous, gossiping smile appearing on her face. She leaned in and tugged at the edge of his clothes, whispering to ask if that lovely lady was his girlfriend. The house was small, of course, so there was no way Yi Qingguan didn't hear every single word. A flash of embarrassment crossed her eyes, as Yunhuan was looking quite disheveled at the moment. She hurriedly turned away, pretending to look at the scenery and trying to appear carefree, but her reddening ears gave her away completely. And yet, the next answer was like a bucket of cold water, a simple, firm no. In truth, his heart wasn't entirely immune to temptation. After all, what right does a dying man have to speak of love to a young woman so favored by everyone, perfect in both personality and appearance? Little Su Xianwan, of course, didn't quite understand the subtle complexities of the adult world. She took him by the hand and led him over to the electronic keyboard, where he finally sat down in front of the keys. His long fingers began to flutter over the keys, and the melodious, moving sound of the piano poured out like water. And we see that Yi Qingguan was instantly captivated by the beauty of this melody. Even her slight disappointment from a moment ago was forgotten by the time the song came to an end. As the final note lingered in the air, Su Xianwan clapped her small hands together until they were red with excitement. She told him he played incredibly, asking if that was the new song by Muliao. Apparently, all the girls in her class sang that very song every single day. He simply smiled without saying a word, choosing not to carry the conversation any further. Deep down, only he knew that this was actually the swan song from his previous world. Meanwhile, in a vast mansion, Muliao, who hadn't slept soundly, sat at her piano as a soft, long light fell over her. Accompanied by the melodious tune, she shone like an elegant queen as her performance gradually improved. The piano grew more artistic and full, and after such a beautiful piece, the housekeeper, Lu, couldn't help but applaud. Every time she completes such a perfect performance, she can't help but remember the past, back when she was only 7 years old. She remembered seeing the piano master on the screen, his fingers dancing passionately over the keys, playing a movement full of strength. She fell deeply in love with the instrument and soon headed off to school to pursue it. Today, fans respect her as a true master, but when she first touched a piano, her teacher thought she had no talent at all, as her understanding of music theory was quite poor. She simply wasn't as naturally sensitive to the music as the other children her age. Furthermore, there was the issue of her hands. Her fingers just weren't long enough. To become a genuine piano virtuoso, having long, slender hands is usually considered an indispensable requirement. That is what the teacher told her during the very first class, and at that time, she was at the bottom of her group, until his appearance changed everything. Even now, she cannot forget him. In that first class, when she was told she had no future in piano, there was a boy facing the exact same limitations. His fingers weren't long either, and yet, he played the piece to absolute perfection. And it was precisely from that day forward that everything shifted. Muliao began to secretly compete with him, thinking that if a poor boy like him could do it, she could certainly do even better. She regained her confidence and practiced diligently, eventually surpassing her peers and earning the hard-won recognition of that very teacher. She was even invited to a famous opera house to take the stage and perform a four-hand duet with the professor himself. She still remembers just how incredibly lucky she felt back then. We should keep in mind that her teacher was the most important artist in the country, a man who had won every national championship. She wasn't even his most prized pupil, as there were several older students whose technical skills were far superior to her own. At the time, though she desperately craved the opportunity, she knew there was only one spot, and it was highly unlikely she would be chosen. But as fate would have it, the professor decided to use a lottery, picking one student at random to join him at the piano. As if the goddess of fortune were smiling directly upon her, Muliao was the one selected to share the stage. She can still clearly remember being inside that grand theater. The professor, who usually had quite an explosive temperament, was remarkably patient throughout the entire performance as they played the duet together. The professor went out of his way to match her rhythm, supporting her the entire time and letting her take all the spotlight for herself. Even though it was her first time on stage, performing before countless spectators, she adapted to the situation with surprising speed. Muliao became incredibly confident, no longer fearing the gazes from the audience, just as the song ended and the curtain fell. The professor gave her the center of the stage. She took an elegant, unapologetic bow, and the media captured the moment perfectly. In their reports, they gave her an extremely high evaluation, claiming the stage was tailor-made for her, and it was all thanks to that performance. Muliao was finally doing exactly what she wanted. Mukin, what do you think of that? After she finished speaking, Muliao paused to choose her next words with her usual, meticulous care. After speaking, Muliao habitually pronounced every word with deliberate precision. Muliao, having finished what she had to say, continued to speak with her characteristic and thorough attention to detail. After she spoke, Muliao followed her habit of pronouncing every syllable with great care. And then, quite suddenly, Muliao stood there completely stunned. Her face was a mask of disbelief as she repeatedly confirmed the recording time, feeling as though she had been struck by lightning. The melody played in the video was the new song she released 2 weeks ago, yet this recording was made a week before she even wrote it. We returned to the house, where he has just finished playing a piece of music. His mother placed the last dish on the table, but as they ate together, Yaqingwen noticed something felt rather strange. After speaking, Muliao habitually continued to express herself with meticulous precision. Muliao, after finishing her sentence, spoke again with her usual, painstaking deliberation. After she had spoken, Muliao habitually pronounced her words with thorough and careful detail. After she finished speaking, Muliao habitually pronounced every word with meticulous care. Muliao, having finished what she had to say, habitually continued to express herself with painstaking precision. After speaking, Muliao followed her habit of pronouncing every syllable with great deliberation. Once she was done, Muliao habitually chose her words with thorough and careful detail. Muliao, after finishing her sentence, spoke again with her usual, meticulous attention to every sound. After she spoke, Muliao habitually pronounced each word with her characteristic precision. Muliao, as was her custom after speaking, articulated everything with minute detail. After she had finished speaking, she habitually continued to pronounce her words with thorough care. After speaking, Muliao habitually pronounced every word with meticulous care. She simply couldn't help her habit of being precise. Muliao, having finished her thought, habitually articulated her words with great deliberation. After she spoke, Muliao habitually pronounced everything with minute detail, maintaining her usual, careful rhythm. Muliao habitually pronounced every word with meticulous care, and Akanya, after speaking, did exactly the same. After she finished, Muliao habitually continued to speak with her characteristic and thorough attention to detail. Muliao, following her usual habit, pronounced every word with painstaking precision after she spoke. After speaking, Muliao habitually chose to articulate her words with meticulous and careful detail. As for her dear brother Muswin, at that exact moment, his phone received a notification for a total of 530,000 yuan, all deducted at once. For Muswin, the statement didn't specify the exact use, but this enormous sum is merely a drop in the ocean for him. After all, his dear brother suffered for 20 years away from home. He should consider it a small compensation from his sister. And then Muliao received some shocking news. She learned from her master during a chat that my piano talent was actually even beyond his own. I stepped through the university gates yesterday, thinking about what I should do with the rest of my life to make it truly meaningful. But in this society, everything requires money, so I must save a great fortune as quickly as possible. To be honest, it's the only practical way forward. In short, I have many business opportunities in mind, such as aggressively buying real estate in the city center or investing heavily in dark horse stocks with unlimited potential. However, the monetization period for those investments is far too long, so I soon focused on a faster way to earn money. I signed up for tonight's welcoming gala. Right there on campus, I ran into Yaqingwen, and the two of them went to the gala auditorium together. It was a grand event, with the university inviting several well-known media outlets. They even opened an official live stream on popular platforms, and although the performance hasn't officially started yet, the number of viewers entering the room has already surpassed 1,000. As soon as we arrived at the venue, the sharp-eyed counselor caught us and enthusiastically led us to the dressing room, while Yaqingwen looked at me with complete confusion. Normally, I am a very discreet person, yet surprisingly, I signed up to perform on stage. Just as I was about to explain, the counselor approached and asked me a question. Tonight's welcoming gala is crucial, and the university leaders have assigned you to take the stage first to kick off the event. Mukin, are you absolutely sure you can do this? Upon hearing this, I nodded calmly. Don't worry, just leave it to me. I consider myself a fairly good piano player. Not long after, the welcoming gala officially began. The presenter was surprised to see me sitting at the piano, having heard that what I was about to play was a completely original piece. Below the stage, the crowd was whispering. Who is this guy? He's far too arrogant. Does he really have the skill to play an original piano piece? No one knows him. He's simply ignorant of the challenge. He is the younger brother of the richest man in Jianxun, Mukin, but I heard the real young master returned a few days ago, and the Mu family broke all ties with him. Accompanied by the sharp sound of a power cut, the dazzling lights of the entire stage suddenly went out. The auditorium fell into an absolute, heavy silence. A blinding beam of light shone from above, fixing its circle firmly on me. I followed the light to the piano at center stage and, with elegant movements, sat on the stool. I opened the lid and adjusted the microphone. In the silence of thousands of people holding their breath, a melody like water flowing from the mountains began to pour out. This beautiful melody, which the audience had never heard before, left the professors and students stunned. They had expected a crude performance, a mere spectacle of amateurism. They never expected this boy to be so serious. The soft notes gradually filled the enormous auditorium, and the listeners seemed to see the very soul of the music unfolding before them. The music seemed to transcend the room, carrying an ethereal quality that left everyone breathless. Even the live stream viewers were captivated, watching the screen as the melody continued to unfold. We see the audience sitting in a trance, naturally wondering what the name of this heavenly song could be. Dream Wedding. Once the piece ended, Mukin gave a simple bow, stepped off the stage, and quietly departed. The university's welcoming gala continued as planned, though the atmosphere had been irrevocably shifted. But in the vast world of the internet, unknown to many at the time, this piano solo had already sparked a storm. The high-definition video of him playing the piano went viral across every major social network. The term Dream Wedding landed with incredible force at the very top of the trending search results. People were commenting that it was simply too brilliant, feeling as though every stroke of his slender fingers struck their very hearts. Questions began to flood the forums, asking why this divine song couldn't be found on any music platform. The realization began to dawn on the public that this might actually be an exclusive, original premiere. As the heat of the discussion exploded exponentially, the giants of the national music industry finally found they could no longer sit still. They wasted no time and sent their music directors to the school immediately. They were determined to obtain the exclusive rights to the piece, no matter what the cost might be. Meanwhile, at the official welcome party for the other Mukin's return, Maliu stood holding a wine glass, looking quite perplexed. She couldn't understand why, after looking everywhere, she couldn't find her second sister, who was supposed to play for the guests. Just at that moment, back at the gala, the music director managed to track our protagonist down backstage. He introduced himself with great respect, telling him it was a true pleasure to finally meet Mr. Mukin. He explained that they were extremely eager to purchase the exclusive broadcasting rights for his song. He asked if Mukin had any intention of cooperating, which, to be honest, was the opportunity he had been waiting for. She incessantly threw out several tempting profit-sharing proposals, hoping to sway him. She never imagined, however, that Mukin would be quite so direct with his response. He told her plainly that he planned to sell all the copyrights to the piece outright. This was definitely a bargain, but just as they were about to finalize the price, the dressing room door was burst open. "Mukin, don't sell it," she cried, telling him to look toward the future and not focus on such a small amount of money. The one who had barged in was none other than his second sister, Miliu Yao. After seeing the live stream, she had rushed all the way there to find him. She said she knew he had been kicked out of the house and needed money urgently, but she insisted he shouldn't sell all the copyrights for such a small, temporary gain. As long as he kept it in his hands, she argued, this piece would only grow in value. He didn't even look at her directly, simply ignoring her presence before asking a cold question. He reminded her that when she forced him to pack his things and leave the Mu house, she had also voted in favor. Am I right? Miliu Yao was obviously shocked to hear this, her eyes turning red as she nodded with guilt. Watching this performance of hers, his heart remained completely unmoved. Deep down, he had already lost all hope in that heartless cage they called a home. At that moment, Miliu Yao's heart was full of things she desperately wanted to tell him. "Mukin, do you have any idea how much I've suffered during this time?" she asked. She claimed that not having him by her side to practice was causing her to lose sleep. She wondered if they could play together like before, missing the times they sat side by side. In her mind, back then, the two of them were doing perfectly well. Just as she was pouring out all those heartfelt emotions, he interrupted her quite abruptly. He asked her what all that nonsense had to do with him anyway. If she wanted to play the piano, he told her she should just go back to her mansion and do it there. He told her to stop coming around and acting like a madwoman in front of him. Miliu Yao was stunned by his words, as the haughty woman never imagined he would show such blatant disgust. In the past, she only needed to say a single sentence for him to come and accompany her. And for over 10 years, he had been there to practice with her, regardless of the weather. Throughout that long decade, he was never even a second late, even when he was sick or burning with fever. To be honest, she knew better than anyone that he once considered accompanying her as life's purpose. But now, we see him looking at her with nothing but a cold, distant gaze. The massive difference in his attitude caused Miliu Yao's eyes to turn an even deeper shade of red. She asked him how he could have become so heartless toward her. She reminded him that he never would have dared to speak to her in such a tone before. She insisted that, as his sister, she truly loved listening to him play the piano. She pleaded with him, asking if he could find it in his heart to dedicate some time to her in the future. Upon hearing those rather repulsive words, he couldn't help but laugh with pure, cold anger. He wondered if he was the crazy one, or if everyone else had simply lost their collective memory. He reminded her how they used to despise him, calling him a useless nuisance who didn't belong in the house. They had conspired to throw him out, heartlessly kicking him into the gutter like trash. And now that they see him at the top, they suddenly come running to remember his virtues. Did they truly have no shame? Without a moment's hesitation, he began to respond with a cutting coldness. First, he suggested that if they were suffering from mental issues, they should see a psychiatrist as soon as possible. He told them to stop pretending they were close. To him, they were nothing more than complete strangers. Having said his piece, he picked up the phone and dialed the security number right in front of her. He calmly asked the security office if they were available, identifying his location as the dressing room. He reported that an idle person from outside the school was harassing him like a madwoman. He then requested that they send someone immediately to escort her out of the building. After hanging up the phone, he looked down at her with nothing but pure, unadulterated contempt. Secondly, he made it clear that his personal affairs were absolutely none of her business. His life was far too valuable to waste time talking to hypocritical people like her, which, to be honest, was a fair point. In that instant, a myriad of grievances and old wounds flooded Miu Yao's heart. She never expected the situation to spiral so completely out of her control like this. In the past, relying on the affection he once held for her, she had committed many mistakes and cruel pranks. There were even several occasions where she had quite literally trampled on his self-esteem. Back then, whenever he wasn't bothered, he would provide her with an escape and money, and she would forgive him immediately. She arrogantly thought that as long as he was willing to yield, this time would be just like the countless times before. She assumed that if he just lowered himself to admit his error, he would be grateful to accompany her at the piano again. Therefore, no matter how hard she tried, she simply could not understand why he was acting this way. She felt she had swallowed her pride to apologize, yet he dared to slam the door on her so shamefully. But just as she prepared to play the role of the big sister and continue her emotional blackmail, the security guards burst in. "Ma'am, are you a student at this school?" the guard asked, his tone leaving very little room for debate. "If not, please cooperate and leave the premises immediately." At long last, a flicker of genuine anxiety began to wash over Miu Yao's face. She took a desperate step forward, looking for all the world like she wanted to argue her way out of this. But he had already grown tired of the drama and impatiently put on his noise-canceling headphones. Finding herself completely ignored, a sharp sense of grievance spread through her chest like the prick of 1,000 needles. She couldn't fathom how things had stalled like this, much less how the younger brother who once adored her had changed so much. It was a drastic transformation, and she, who had always held the upper hand, suddenly felt a wave of panic. Deep down, she was terrified that the shadow who always followed her was about to vanish from her life forever. Under the guard's increasingly stern gaze, Miu Yao could only hang her head and let herself be escorted out like a defeated puppy. By the time she returned to the mansion in a frantic state, the grand celebration dinner was already winding down. At that very moment, we see Mu Xin standing under the spotlights, singing with what he clearly thought was great passion. He suddenly approached his second sister, who was standing in the crowd with a dazed, almost haunted expression. He assumed his song had moved her to tears, unaware that Miu Yao was actually weeping because his singing was so painfully off-key. It was quite the comparison. One younger brother is emotionally brilliant and outshines everyone in the room, while this other brother, well, he sounds more like a ghost howling in the wind. The sharp contrast made her feel utterly miserable, and all she wanted to do was cry. The next morning, with the sun high in the sky, the first thing she did upon waking was reach for her phone to send a test message. She opened WeChat, hoping against hope to see if he had finally removed her from his blacklist. But as soon as she unlocked the screen, a breaking news notification popped up that changed everything. The music website officially announced that they had signed a contract with the piano genius, Mukin. They had spent $2 million to purchase the full rights to his piece, Wedding Dream. After reading the report, she couldn't help but curse, thinking him an idiot with absolutely no business sense. She had bitterly advised him not to rush into any kind of sale. From the ruthless perspective of her own experience in the entertainment industry, the math was simple. A conservative estimate suggested that he only needed to wait less than 10 years to see a real return. Through profit sharing alone, he would have earned at least $5 million, not to mention the other benefits over the next few decades. This irritating news left her feeling even more distressed and utterly unable to sleep. After being baptized by that piano solo that shocked the entire internet, it was clear Mukin's technique had reached perfection. He possessed a level of expertise comparable to a master who had been immersed in the craft for decades. This realization caused her to involuntarily sink into a deep sense of doubt. Had he been hiding his true talent all those times she gave him practice lessons in the past? Otherwise, how could he have suddenly awakened the moment he decided to leave? Perhaps he had done it all just to protect her own fragile self-esteem. After successfully securing the 2 million in royalties, he headed to the hospital to purchase a stack of specialized imported medicines. Later, we see him crouching on the street, nibbling on pancakes while busy airing out and inspecting his goods. This rather contrasting scene was witnessed by Uncle Zen, who watched from a distance. To be honest, if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have dared to believe it. A piano genius earning millions, yet in private, he works like a common laborer, strictly following the fine print of his contract. Finally, Mukin entered the recording studio to officially record his masterpiece, Wedding Dream. Uncle Zen respectfully offered him a cup of premium red tea, treating him with the utmost care. "Mr. Mu, the initial payment has been transferred to your account in batches," he informed him. The reason he was being so accommodating to this inexperienced young man was simply because of Mukin's age, as he had barely reached 20. To be able to write a masterpiece of this caliber at such a young age was truly unheard of. Who would dare to guarantee that this monster didn't have even more material hidden away in his mind? Who's to say he was incapable of producing a second or third bombshell of this magnitude? By taking the opportunity now to invest resources heavily and maximize his favor, Zen was playing the long game. The probability of winning an exclusive premiere in the future would, naturally, be much higher. Radiant with joy, Uncle Zen stood up and extended his right hand in a friendly gesture. "Mr. Mu, I wish us a successful and smooth cooperation on our very first project together. If you have other masterpieces like this in the future, I believe you have already seen our sincerity. We are all very much looking forward to the chance to cooperate with you once again." But his enthusiasm was met with nothing but cold indifference. Zen offered a great deal of flattering compliments, but Mukin sat there like a log, giving no response whatsoever. He didn't even show the slightest intention of standing up to shake the man's hand. This arrogant attitude secretly angered Zen, who wasn't used to being ignored. However, he had been immersed in the industry for many years and had seen his fair share of eccentrics. There are many monsters, after all, who rely on their talent and possess quite strange temperaments. Just as Zen was about to turn around and leave, Mukin finally, slowly, raised his eyes. And then he spoke. "I'm sorry, my brain just short-circuited for a moment." "Since you were so eager for our next cooperation," Mukin said, "then let's not waste time waiting for a next time. Better today than tomorrow. Let's decide to do it tonight." And the next sentence he uttered so casually surprised Zen so much that his jaw practically hit the floor. "I still have a complete original score in my pocket," he added. "In terms of quality, it isn't even half a step inferior to Wedding Dream." As soon as those words were spoken, the entire recording studio fell into an instant, heavy silence. Not just Uncle Zen's world, but his entire perspective on life was shattered, while the sound engineer next door stared with wide eyes. To write a song like Wedding Dream at 20 is already the mark of a peerless genius, a classic for the ages. But right under their noses, Mukin was claiming he had another divine masterpiece of the same caliber hidden away. How could this not be terrifying? It was enough to make one's skin crawl. The expression on Uncle Zen's face at that moment could only be described as marvelous, a mix of shock and awe. To him, this was absolutely like discovering a living, breathing treasure. If the young man could truly produce another divine song of equal quality, then the creative talent of this monster was frightening to the point of being completely outrageous. And yet, such a dazzling celestial star had somehow remained completely unknown in the industry for the last 20 years. Secretly, Zen resolved to treat him with even more respect, eager to appreciate this mysterious new song in person. When Mukin's hands stretched over the piano keys, countless dense notes poured out like a flood of blood. The song dazzled the senses, and immediately after, the sound of the piano entered a state of hysterical frenzy. His entire temperament shifted as he played, as if he were using the music to scream against fate, venting every emotion until exhaustion. Uncle Zen was practically trembling with emotion. He had truly found an invaluable treasure. The only critique of the previous song, Wedding Dream, was its low difficulty, but this new display of skill was the complete opposite. The dazzling speed of the piece was vital, as if his fingers were engaged in a frantic battle across the keys. Meanwhile, at the imposing and desolate Mu mansion, Muyulu knocked on Mu Lejiao's bedroom door for a long time. "Lejiao, don't sleep the day away," she called out. "Get up quickly and come down to eat." However, when the door slowly creaked open, Mu Lejiao emerged with her hair in a mess, looking like a living corpse. This sorrowful appearance genuinely frightened Muyulu, who immediately asked what was wrong. She wondered if she felt ill, but very quickly, she guessed the true root of the problem. "Is it because of that ungrateful wolf, Mukin?" she asked, her suspicion growing. She knew Lejiao had gone to see him in secret the night before and wondered if he had said something cruel. She promised her sister that she would go and vent her anger on him right that second. To be honest, Muyula felt it didn't matter if she herself was mistreated by Mukin. After all, she had caused Mukin some grievances in the past through her own negligence. but she couldn't understand how he could possibly justify being so cold to her second sister. Upon hearing this, Mu Lijiao simply broke down and began to cry even harder. "Do you really think the songs I have were written by me?" she sobbed in despair. She asked if anyone truly believed she was capable of composing such classic melodies. Muyula thought her sister's brain had fried, refusing to believe that ungrateful man could write anything. To be perfectly honest, Muyula didn't understand a single word of what her sister was talking about. Mukin had lived with the Mu family for over 10 years, and they thought they knew him. They had never heard a whisper about him possessing this kind of talent. Even if he knew a bit about music, what could that possibly have to do with the song she wrote? "Ever since Mukin blocked me, Mr. Su hasn't sent me a single message," she confessed. Because of this, she was now absolutely certain that Mr. Su and Mukin were the same person. Muyulu was left stunned by this revelation, and suddenly, he remembered exactly who Mr. Su was. This mysterious figure had created many divine songs specifically tailored for his sister. The quality of every single track had been exceptionally high. They were all masterpieces that had become genuine cultural phenomena. On all the major music platforms, Muyulu had tried to find this benefactor to reward him properly on his sister's behalf. But the man never appeared in public. For years, Mr. Su had only communicated with them through the internet. If this mysterious tycoon turned out to be Mukin, Muyulu wouldn't believe it if his life depended on it. To him, there was simply no way it was possible, and it had to be a mere coincidence. He refused to believe Mukin possessed such heavenly talent, which, to be honest, was a bit of a denial. But before he could even finish his sentence, his sister cut him off. She insisted that Mukin really did have that talent, and that it was truly astonishing. She pointed out that he probably hadn't had time to check the latest entertainment news. Mukin had just created a masterpiece, and even her own mentor was full of praise for the song. The largest music platform in the country had even spent a fortune just to secure the copyrights. Muyulu certainly hadn't been paying attention to the news, but after hearing his sister's explosive explanation, his mind raced. The first thought that came to him was that Mukin, that ungrateful man, was far more cunning than they imagined. What is he doing? 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 What exactly is he doing? What is it that he's doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? What is it that he's doing? What is he 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 doing? What is it that he's doing? What is it that he's doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? Who wants more and why? Why would they? But there is an end to everything. He was completely overwhelmed by the situation. Had he been very happy? The truth is, in the midst of all this chaos and the encounters he had faced, things were becoming far more complicated. It was a difficult position to be in, to say the least. Like a veteran of the business world, he quickly recovered. The last unpleasant incident was merely a misunderstanding between him and Mukin, and today he was here for a calm chat with Mui Hulu. He had just gone to the university only to find the boy wasn't there, so he figured his brother must be home. As he said this, Mui Hulu slipped into the house. While the mother stood there dazed, he offered an apologetic gesture and asked her not to take offense, heavily placing 2 boxes of high-quality tea from the mansion onto the worn coffee table. But unexpectedly, Su Willen grabbed the tea leaves and threw them outside, shouting for him to take his stinking charity away, a move that left Mui Hulu utterly stunned. He cursed to himself, thinking this poor family must have eaten something foul, as they all had tempers like they were chewing on gunpowder. In Mui Hulu's arrogant view, Su Willen should have been an honest person easily molded to his will, and he couldn't understand why this lower-class person's attitude had suddenly changed. "Auntie, please calm down," he said. "I am here sincerely to apologize to the boy I consider my brother. I admit I didn't do well enough before." Mui Hulu had lowered himself to come here this time. Not just to apologize under pressure, but to ask a favor, so he had to swallow his anger and endure it patiently, which, for someone with his explosive temper, was no small feat. Normally, he would have erupted on the spot, but hearing that the other party came to apologize, the mother's expression softened, though her paranoia made her want to push him out the door. She remembered the last time this woman claimed to come in peace only to cause an uproar. Su Willen was just about to order him out when the door opened. "Mom, who are you arguing with?" Seeing me at home, Mui Hulu quickly approached, asking if he could come in and talk. I didn't even raise my eyelids as I stepped back to close the door, but Mui Hulu was too fast. He firmly gripped the doorknob, refusing to let go. "You know," he said, "after you left, the second sister was in a terrible state. She hasn't slept in days, and after seeing you that night, she became even more despondent." He claimed she had no desire to eat or drink and locked herself away all day, but my tone remained calm as I asked why that should matter to me anymore. Repeatedly pressured by Su Willen, the restraint Mui Hulu had been holding onto finally collapsed. Perhaps subconsciously, he still saw me as the obedient little brother. His voice rose instantly. "Do you have a heart of stone? Leadu is in despair and doing poorly, yet you say such insensitive things. I've begged you humbly. What more do you want?" As soon as he finished, a whistling sound filled my ears followed by a heart-wrenching pain so intense I couldn't make a sound. Mui Hulu was still acting like the dominant older sister. He admitted that he understood the resentment, but he couldn't grasp why the boy was treating the second sister this way, accusing him of being violent that night. He demanded clarity, his face filled with a deep disappointment. After all, he remembered a time when the boy seemed to treasure every little thing they gave him. Back then, he thought the boy truly valued their relationship, but now it seemed that was all just a figment of his imagination, and quite a delusional one at that. We can imagine the boy's confusion. They likely popped champagne when he left, so why the sudden illness? Hearing this, Hulu's internal fuse finally ran out. Calling him ungrateful, he raised his hand to strike as he always had, but the boy caught his wrist, sending him stumbling as he asked if he'd even questioned his sister. Hulu, a bit dazed by the sudden resistance, was caught off guard. The truth was, he hadn't actually asked Mulia why she was so miserable. He had simply seen her sadness and assumed it was all the boy's fault. But as the boy ordered him out, another sharp, stabbing pain attacked his brain. It was so agonizing that he clutched his head. Hulu started to snap back at him, but then he noticed something was genuinely wrong with the boy. Suddenly remembering the boy's health, he told him to rest, promising to find an expert tomorrow, dismissing the past slander as something that should simply be forgotten. He viewed this entire departure as a mere temper tantrum, offering a way back into the Mui family as long as certain conditions were met. This had been his plan all along. As compensation, once the boy returned, he could go back to accompanying the second sister during her piano practice. In the eyes of a businesswoman like Hulu, the boy was still a valuable investment, and she had weighed the pros and cons before making this decision. However, there was a catch. He had to apologize to her and the second sister, arguing that since they were family, his previous harsh words were out of line. Hulu was slipping back into her old, authoritative role, still pining for the obedient brother of the past, even while she was supposedly making a concession. The boy was nearly dizzy with rage, unable to fathom where this unearned confidence came from while he was forced to listen to such nonsense through his pain. He finally snapped, pointing out that he hadn't said a single word about wanting to return, wondering who gave Hulu such a grand illusion of self-importance. He told her she was the one acting strangely, constantly seeking him out just to bother him, and even asked if her brain had turned to mush. Hulu exploded instantly, declaring she had done her best, and that he shouldn't even dream of returning now, not even if he begged on his knees. The boy actually laughed at that, mockingly thanking her and telling her that the thought of never returning was a relief. Then he told her to get out. Hulu trembled with a fury so intense it was almost physical. Between the recent events and this blatant disrespect, she was reaching her absolute limit. She was practically grinding her teeth. After all, the most prominent businessman in Jianshan had come to the door in person, setting aside his status just to see him. Instead of being grateful, the boy was using him as a punching bag to vent his frustrations, and yet Hulu still clung to the delusion that he wanted to return to the family. To be honest, his current living situation was already 100 times better than that broken storage room. But just then, Hulu's phone began to vibrate in her pocket. She originally planned to hang up, but her expression shifted when she saw the caller ID. It was Mulia, asking anxiously how things were going with her brother. She wanted to know if he was willing to come home, and Hulu's face froze in embarrassment, caught off guard by her younger sister's hopeful question. Even so, she patiently explained the situation, though her description was filled with subjective inventions where she played the innocent victim and painted the boy as a villain. The boy almost laughed at the sheer absurdity of it, but he didn't bother to expose her. In fact, he hoped she would slander him enough to keep them away forever. After Hulu finished venting, she thought her sister would finally give up on him, preventing any further madness from ruining the girl's health. We see that she truly believed her sister would side with her, never expecting that the response from the other end of the line would be so desperate. Mulia pleaded with him, asking him to understand their older sister's temperament and just come home. She was practically begging him at this point. Before anyone could scold her, the sadness in her voice became sharp and piercing. It was clear that the weight of the situation was becoming too much for her to bear. Meanwhile, Qin returned home in a daze, thinking about how he had finally found a place off campus, only to end up dropping his dinner in his distraction. He locked the door and sat on his bed in the dark, letting the memories of the past flood his mind uncontrollably as he stared into the silence. He remembered their university military training, a day so sweltering that sweat pooled in his cap, while the instructor watched them all with a hidden agenda. The instructor had brought out a watermelon to reward them, and for a moment, the class thought he was a saint, until they saw his mischievous side emerge once again. As expected, he ordered the men and women to sit face-to-face with the watermelon between them, setting the stage for a little game of speed and reflexes. The rule was simple. When he finished counting down and shouted the word eat, they could grab the slice in front of them, but the instructor was a man of surprises. The moment they sat down, he shouted the command, and the scene instantly dissolved into chaos. Qin remembered being just a second too slow. He had barely reacted when he realized the slice was out of his reach, but then, someone unexpectedly pushed the watermelon toward him. He had been completely stunned in that moment, only waking from his daze when the crowd erupted into cheers, his face flushing with a sudden, confused heat. He sat there, face flushing, lost in the memory of those student days. Back then, no one truly knew what kind of person he was, and he certainly hadn't resigned himself to his fate yet. At first, she had tried to help him, but as the disagreements in his life began to pile up, he eventually followed her lead all the way to her school. To be honest, it was a series of real misunderstandings that toppled his throne years ago. Everything was lost when he began to realize his trajectory was being deeply affected. Imagine living in a constant state of uncertainty regarding your private life, where every small interaction felt like a board game where the rules were constantly changing. The man looked like a madman. The moment he saw him, he raised a knife and lunged, sending pedestrians screaming and running in every direction until they finally united to subdue him. He remembers how, when she accompanied him to the hospital to bandage the wound, she cried inconsolably, asking through her sobs if he even valued his own life anymore. In that moment, he didn't say a word, choosing instead to gently comfort her. He still remembers her impulsive vow that if anything happened to him, she wouldn't want to live either. He eventually convinced her to take those words back, but it was on that very day that he secretly swore he would be willing to give his own life for her if things ever turned desperate again. Countless similar memories flood his mind now. He tries desperately to forget them, but these images haunt him like shadows, leaving a dull, persistent ache in his heart. He wondered if it was because she had entered the circle of stars and met new people that her heart had changed. After all, they had known each other since high school. For 5 full years, she thought her feelings were just a vague attraction, but today she suddenly realized she was already deeply in love with every part of him. She loved the way he haggled when buying things, the way he gulped down soda, and the quiet way he read his books. Falling in love is an instant, but true love takes years. Thinking of this, she hurriedly reached for her phone, perhaps hoping to find some remnant of the deep affection and professional attitude he had always shown her. She looked for the messages that captured their good times and his talented nature, finally realizing that what she truly missed wasn't just his help, but his presence. She remembered the images from when she was teasing Lionel, but as she looked at her screen, she realized the chat interface remained completely and utterly silent. She then tried calling his number. After the first call went unanswered, the second attempt made it painfully clear that she had been blocked entirely. After Muyulu was kicked out by his mother and himself, the mother had even issued a severe warning, making it clear that no matter how powerful a boss she was, they weren't afraid. She warned her that the next time she dared to come and bother her son, she would call the police directly to have her arrested on the spot. And so, Muyulu, simmering with a quiet rage, finally stepped out of the apartment building and into the cool air. When she spotted the supercar parked at the entrance, she wasn't surprised. She was used to such luxury, but she quickly noticed that this particular car was unique. We see that this is the very same car she had personally given to Muzhuan at dinner. Just then, the car window began to roll down slowly. Muzhuan poked her head out, her face clouded with a look of deep concern for her sister. She asked what was wrong and how on earth her clothes had gotten so incredibly dirty. Muyulu climbed into the car, her expression cold and her mood clearly dampened by the recent encounter. She told her it was nothing and simply urged her to hurry up and drive away. After all, how could she possibly share the embarrassing story of being kicked out so unceremoniously? However, as they traveled along the road, Muzhuan decided to ask a tentative question about the meeting. She asked if they had failed to reach an agreement, though deep down she was already celebrating and took the chance to play the innocent victim. She explained that it wasn't her fault, especially after she had told him the truth about the adoption. She lamented that Brother Myukin surely hated her to death now, didn't he? She suggested that even though they had never met, he must feel she ruined his life, which would explain his intense anger. As she spoke, Muzhuan truly began to lose herself in the role she was playing. Her voice sounded forced and slightly choked up, as if she were suffering from a grave illness. She claimed the solution wasn't for them to return, but to beg Myukin to come home, provided it made her sister happy. She insisted she didn't care what happened to her and could endure any hitting or scolding he might dish out. As Muyulu listened to these words, the blood pressure that had just begun to settle started to rise once again. She sharply tapped the car window and asked if she hadn't already told her to focus on driving carefully. She demanded to know why she was even mentioning that ungrateful man, leaving Muzhuan startled by the sudden reaction. In truth, she really wanted to add one more dramatic line about doing anything for her sister's happiness. And in that moment of performative sadness, she almost took the act too far, but decided it might seem a bit too hypocritical. Right at that very moment, the phone began to ring. Muyulu answered the call, asking if Lawyer Lu needed something. President Mu, we have investigated thoroughly. The mastermind behind the accusation against Myukin is his own younger brother, Muzhuan. Muzhuan happened to overhear this. She panicked instantly and slammed on the brakes. In that moment, a look of complete astonishment washed over Muyulu's face. She wondered why Muzhuan would do such a thing, hoping it was just someone with the same name. But Muzhuan's guilty reaction told a different story. Seeing that guilt, Muyulu felt a sinking sensation in her chest. She already knew the truth in her heart, but one question remained. When that incident occurred 6 months ago, Muzhuan hadn't even returned to the Mu family yet. Big sister, why would you suspect me? Muzhuan asked, her voice trembling. She pleaded, asking what she could possibly gain from such things, reminding her sister of what she had just said. She insisted that if they wanted Mukun to return, she was even willing to apologize to him personally. Muyula hesitated slightly upon hearing this. To be honest, she didn't really want to dig for the truth anymore. After all, the true young master of the Mu family had finally returned. The imposter was gone, and it seemed the Mu family could finally return to a sense of normalcy. She simply didn't want any more trouble or complications caused by Mukin's existence. Half an hour later, the two of them arrived back at the family mansion. We see a mansion whose design had been modified dozens of times by a powerful tycoon. From the general layout of the courtyard to the placement of a single ornamental rock, everything reflected the designer's painstaking hard work. The gazebo in front of the main building offers a direct view of the entrance. And there, having waited for a long time, Muzhuan watched as the two figures stepped out of the car. It was difficult for her to hide the joy on her face, but as the two of them drew closer, she clearly saw the expressions of the Mu family members. The gazebo in front of the main building finally reveals the person arriving. Although it was her younger brother who returned, a flash of disappointment crossed Muzhuan's eyes. Deep down, she was actually longing to see Mukun much more, elder sister. Muzhuan was just about to speak, but Muyulu cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand. Let's go inside and talk, she said, and so the three of them entered the house together. Once inside, Muzhuan discovered that there were already some familiar faces waiting in the living room. Wan Ji and Wan Meilin were already there, looking as though they were sitting on pins and needles. The moment she saw Muzhuan enter, Wan Meilin began to tremble even more violently. Muyulu dismissed the other servants first, and then, with a cold expression, she finally spoke. Wan Meilin, you signed a non-disclosure agreement, she began, her voice icy. This act of biting the hand that feeds you means that, if I choose to sue you, every cent you earn for the rest of your life will have to go toward compensation. Wan Meilin was so terrified by this warning that her legs simply wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't even wait for a detailed interrogation before she began to confess everything. As it turned out, it was indeed Muzhuan who had ordered her to find a girl to accuse Mukun of harassment. Muzhuan was also the one who had transferred the hush money to keep the secret safe. These words struck Mu Liao like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. She simply couldn't wrap her head around it. Why on earth would Muzhuan do such a thing? That incident happened a year ago, didn't it? How could Muzhuan possibly be involved back then? But with the facts laid bare before her, Mu Liao stopped worrying about the timeline. The truth was already staring her in the face. She pointed angrily at Muzhuan, demanding to know why on earth he had done such a thing. Did he not realize, she asked, just how much damage this would cause to Mukun? However, before she could even finish her sentence, Muyilo slammed her palm down onto the coffee table. Enough, she snapped, asking if this family wasn't already chaotic enough as it was. She reminded Mu Liao that Muzhuan was her own younger brother, and that he had suffered greatly while away. In her eyes, no one had truly looked after him or loved him during all those long years. She asked if she couldn't try to understand him, rather than constantly protecting that stranger. Muyilo's blatant favoritism left Mu Liao completely stunned, and honestly, who could blame her? When she finally came to her senses, she wanted to argue further, but Butler Lu secretly held her back. Standing to the side, Muzhuan let out a long, silent sigh of relief. He had fully expected a harsh punishment this time, never imagining his eldest sister would let it slide. Muyilo raised her hand, but in the end, she simply couldn't bring herself to strike her own flesh and blood. She gave a firm order. No one was to ever mention this incident again in the future. In her own mind, she felt she had already offered Mukun a sufficient apology. As far as she was concerned, the storm from that year had already passed and should stay buried. There was no need, she reasoned, to create internal conflict over someone she considered an outsider. The most important thing, after all, was for the family to live together in peace. As for why Muzhuan had wanted to cause such trouble, Muyilo likely already had a good idea. For years, she had been sending people out to search for Muzhuan's whereabouts. During that time, she had investigated many different foster families in her search for the truth. It had already been 2 years since she first contacted Muzhuan's foster parents to ask about his adoption, unaware that things had gone quite poorly. A full year passed before she finally received a definitive answer from them. During that long year, she had reached out to the other parties several times, seeking clarity. Only then was she able to confirm that the boy was, in fact, our Muzhuan. After completing the paternity testing process, she finally brought her younger brother back home, where he belonged. She assumed that during that period of time, the foster parents must have told Muzhuan the whole story. As for Muzhuan's actual motive for committing such a crime, she felt it stemmed from a lack of security. Knowing an imposter had taken his place, she could forgive his impulsive and foolish actions. Seeing his eldest sister take the matter so lightly, Muzhuan realized he had essentially been given a free pass. In that moment, Muzhuan felt a wave of conflicting emotions, realizing his sister's prejudice against Mukun was deeply rooted. Mukun had suffered all kinds of punishments for this very matter back then, unfairly, as we now know. In the words of his eldest sister, Mukun had been painted as nothing more than irredeemable scum. Now, Muzhuan finally understood why Mukun refused to return home, no matter what happened. Everything was clear. His sister wasn't willing to investigate the truth or restore Mukin's innocence. To be honest, it was a tragic realization. Under those circumstances, how could Mukun ever be willing to come back? Muyalo then told Liao to wash her hands and get ready for dinner, acting as if nothing had happened. I'm not hungry, Liao replied coldly, turning her back on them and walking away. On her way to the bedroom, another thought struck her and woke her up to a grim reality. Muzhuan's misdeeds were likely just the beginning. The more she thought about it, the more frightened she became of the family's internal dynamics. During Mukin's last year at home, it seemed he was blamed for causing trouble every other day, which, naturally, seemed very different now. The little patience the eldest sister had left for Mukin finally ran out during that year, just a few days before Muzhuan's return. And so, without much thought, she quickly made that ruthless decision. The following morning, we see Wang Yiyun's staff arriving to knock on the door. Did they want to film a program? No, it was something else entirely. To be perfectly honest, the first few installments of this show were actually quite grounded in reality. He didn't rush to conclusions, but he opened the door cautiously, having already suffered from cyber violence and the malice of internet trolls. Deep down, his primary concern was protecting his family from having to show their faces to the world. A piano genius? The young man standing before them was dressed in an extremely simple manner. He wore an ordinary sweatshirt with faded cropped pants and a pair of sneakers from an unknown brand. It was estimated that his entire outfit wasn't even worth 200 yuan, a modest choice, to say the least. The viewers couldn't help but wonder, what exactly had he done with himself? While some musicians appear to dress casually, their clothes are usually expensive luxury items in disguise. Some of them even go as far as bringing their own personal stylists to every shoot. Seeing a young man present himself so humbly actually amused the netizens watching the stream. Many joke that his outfit looked exactly like something they would wear at home. One viewer even searched for the same model online and found the set cost 40 yuan at most. They pointed out that Mukin had earned 4 million recently, making his appearance even more striking. The host, following the script, asked if it was really necessary to be quite so frugal. The interview then moved on to more professional questions regarding his mental process during the creative phase. And yet, the question remained in the air. What had he truly been through to end up like this? What exactly has he done to himself? What in the world has he done to himself? What is it that he has done to himself? What is it that he has done to himself? What exactly has he done to himself? What is the thing he has done to himself? What is the thing he has done to himself? What exactly has he done to himself? What is it that he has done to himself? What is the thing he has done to himself? What is it that he has done? What is it that he has done? What exactly has he done to himself? What is it that he has done to himself? What has he done to himself? What has he done? What has he done? What has he done? What is it that he has done? What has he done to himself? 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 He is actually the younger brother of the richest man, though it seems he was only adopted. Now, we see he has returned to his biological mother. His mother suffered greatly while trying to find her son. She even appeared on the local news searching for her family. And so, it seems clear that Mukin earns money to improve his family's life. The narrator truly doesn't understand why their thoughts are so filthy. The clarification video ended abruptly here because Inzin spent a fortune to buy traffic. This video was quickly pushed right to the top of the trending charts. Inzin was so terrified that his legs actually gave out when he saw the trends these days. He was deeply afraid that Mukin would hold him accountable after becoming so famous, especially if he still held a grudge over that business at the restaurant. If Mukin posted an update showing their chat history, his brother's stable job would certainly be at risk. So, he forced Ineo to reconcile with Mukin and record an apology video. Inzin was quite satisfied with the overall effect of the video, to be honest. His attitude seemed sincere, and the clarification couldn't have come at a better time. This allowed his racing heart to calm down just a little bit. The video caused an absolute sensation across the internet. Many netizens dug up old news clips and saw the reports of the mother searching thousands of miles for her son. Everyone finally began to realize the heavy burden Mukin had been carrying. The officials at Wang Yiyun also issued a timely statement, announcing the copyright fees for Mukin's 2 songs. He had transferred the entire amount directly into his mother's private account. This single move completely reversed the tide of public opinion. The smear campaign by competing companies had backfired spectacularly. Instead, it helped Mukin attract and solidify a massive wave of loyal fans. His social media accounts instantly gained 500,000 new followers. Watching the viewers flood into the live stream, we see the screen fill with warm, encouraging comments. At first, he was a bit surprised, but then a hint of warmth flowed through his frozen heart. "Thank you all for your concern," he said, noticing that some friends were suggesting a fundraiser for him. He truly appreciated everyone's kindness, but he simply couldn't bring himself to accept the money. Deep down, he knew he had the ability to earn enough to support his family on his own. A few days later, we see that Mulieo's retinal degeneration was becoming increasingly severe. His mental state was in a terrible way, frayed by his irregular and chaotic schedule. He began frantically sending messages to both Mukin and Mr. Su, hoping for any sign of life. But his efforts were like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no response whatsoever. This silence caused him to drift uncontrollably back into his own memories. He remembered how Myukin used to sweetly call him sister when they were just children. Back then, the boy had unconditionally tolerated his every outburst and bad mood. He recalled his own past behavior, acting like a spoiled princess at every turn. Whenever he made a mistake in a relationship or simply hit the wrong notes on the piano, he would take it out on Myukin for no reason, screaming and losing his temper completely. Sometimes it was simply because Myukin played better than he did, which, naturally, was unacceptable. It wounded his sensitive, jealous heart, and he would hysterically tell Myukin to leave, claiming he hated him. But every single time, Myukin wouldn't argue or defend himself. He would just smile and offer a greeting. The next day, as if he had lost his memory, he would affectionately call him sister again and help him practice. Suddenly, the images in his memory shifted, becoming sharp and painful. The day Myukin finally took the initiative to apologize to him stabbed at Mulyao's heart like a knife. It made him realize, with a sense of utter desperation, that everything was truly over. He couldn't help but wonder how Myukin had become so cold and indifferent toward him. He had been so kind before, and now Muliao truly understood just how much he had messed up. As the tears began to well up in his eyes, he wondered why he wasn't even being given a way out. He told himself that if Myukin had known the truth, that he had braved a snowstorm to beg the master for a chance, he never would have let him be kicked out. In his mind, he was certain that Myukin would have done everything in his power to protect him. But then, we see a sad realization hit him. The eldest sister had clearly investigated the truth behind the rumors yesterday. And yet, she remained biased, showing no intention of clearing his name or restoring his innocence. He felt he was still a coward, lacking the courage to truly stand up against his elder sister. His mind drifted back to that opportunity. They had to play a piano duet together. He had done so many things for Myukin in secret, things the other boy never even knew about. It seemed Myukin didn't realize how good he had it until he finally lost him, or so he told himself. Lost in these thoughts, Muliao began to tremble, his face completely drenched in tears. He clumsily wiped his eyes, reached for his phone, and opened his chat history with Mr. Su. Mr. Su's avatar remained a cold, lifeless gray, showing no signs of activity. The more time passed, the more certain he became that he and Mr. Su were one and the same. His fingers trembled visibly as he began to scroll back through their old messages. He looked back at how Mr. Su had constantly encouraged him when he released his very first original song. Back then, he had watched that song sweep through the new music charts on every platform. He remembered how excitedly he had shared the good news with Mr. Su at the time. And Mr. Su, while offering his encouragement, had also given him a very stern warning. A single successful song, he had been told, is never enough. If an artist cannot produce a second or third hit, the public will forget them in the blink of an eye. There are far too many one-hit wonders in the music scene who eventually fade into mediocrity and the ordinary. Now that Muliao has achieved success, he feels more than ever that Mr. Su's words were absolute truth. This realization, naturally, has plunged him into a deep panic regarding his own talent. He had originally planned to go into seclusion recently to focus entirely on composing new songs. But for some reason, his mind is a complete mess, devoid of inspiration and unable to write even a single chord. Just as his frustration was peaking, he suddenly discovered that Mr. Su had posted a location update on his profile. The post itself was blank, but the location tag pointed directly to a hospital. Muliao has a very vivid memory of this particular hospital, and for good reason. After the eldest sister mentioned Myukin was malnourished, he had secretly checked the physical exam reports. Every single one of them was stamped with the official seal of this very hospital. This irrefutable evidence completely confirmed Myukin's identity to him, but after the initial rush of excitement, a massive wave of panic instantly gripped his heart. Why had Myukin gone to the hospital again, and what kind of diagnosis had he received this time? Feeling deeply uneasy, Muliao went straight to the hospital and tracked down the attending physician, Zhang Hingran. "Doctor, hello, I am Myukin's sister," he said, trying to maintain his composure. When he asked for an update on the condition, Zhang Hingran simply adjusted the glasses on the bridge of his nose. "You say you are his elder sister," the doctor noted, "so why did you never accompany him to his checkups before?" The man had practiced medicine for half his life, after all, and he had seen countless people come and go. He had witnessed it all: birth, old age, illness, and death. Over time, he had developed a rule: the mental suffering of terminal patients is often more painful than the physical, so medical treatment is only half the battle. Once an incurable disease is diagnosed, to protect the patient's psychological defenses, he usually notifies the relatives first to let them decide based on the patient's resilience. Whether or not to reveal the cruel truth is a heavy choice, and the reason Zhang Hingran remembers Myukin so well is because he always came to his checkups alone. Alone and isolated. Muliao noticed the doctor's tone was hiding something, and her heart sank to the very bottom. She wondered, with growing dread, if her brother had been diagnosed with some kind of terminal illness. The doctor simply replied that, unfortunately, this was the patient's personal privacy. He pointed out that if she were truly a close sister, she should ask Myukin herself rather than coming to him for answers. He then asked if she had anything else to inquire about, suggesting she close the door on her way out if she was finished. It was a cold dismissal. She felt as though she didn't even have the right to ask anymore. As we see the next patient enter, Mu Yao is forced to leave the office, feeling utterly dejected. Even though Dr. Zhang remained silent, her unsettling premonition only grew stronger and more suffocating. The hallway was crowded with other patients, many of them around the same age, all facing their own battles. Almost every single one of them had family members there to offer a word of comfort. Those patients, filled with fear over their physical exam reports, seemed to calm down gradually under the gentle words of their loved ones. In that moment, Mu Yao felt a sharp, physical ache in her heart. If Mukin really had been diagnosed with a terminal illness back then, imagine how desperate he must have felt receiving that report all by himself. She tried to tell herself not to panic, that Mukin was a lucky person and everything would be fine. He is only 20 years old, after all, so very young. Mu Yao frantically tried to hypnotize herself with these thoughts, forcing herself to keep moving forward despite the fear. Mu Yao felt herself hypnotized by her own thoughts, frantically trying to steady her heart as she forced herself to head toward the prison. She continued to desperately hypnotize herself deep down, pushing her trembling legs to finally reach the prison gates. Deep within her heart, she kept up that frantic self-deception, compelling herself to step inside the prison walls. Mu Yao frantically tried to convince her heart that everything was fine, forcing herself to walk into the prison. Mukin is my most incredible brother, she thought, remembering how her classmates and her were such die-hard fans of Sister Liao. They would sing all of her hit songs together. To them, she sang beautifully. Upon learning that her little fan was actually her sister, her eyes behind the sunglasses instantly softened and began to tear up. She thanked her little sister for all the love and affection she had shown. She then asked if her brother was home, wondering if she could come in for a glass of water. Sujio Nuana nodded her head as if she were crushing garlic, eagerly taking Muliao's hand and leading her idol into the house to sit down. As Muliao sat on the living room sofa, this frantic little sister began busying herself without a single moment's rest. First, she ran to the fridge for apple juice, and then she searched everywhere to bring out the snacks she had been hoarding. These were treats she usually only tasted sparingly, unwilling to finish them all at once. Muliao, being a female celebrity, usually watched her sugar intake and avoided snacks, but this was a special occasion. But she truly liked this little girl, so, breaking her own rules, she opened a bag of chips and shared them with Sujio Noana. During their relaxed and pleasant chat, Muliao noticed acutely that when Sujio Noana listened, she seemed wise beyond her years. As Muliao offered gentle comfort, the little girl's mouth began to twitch, and she suddenly burst into a heavy sob. This scene startled Muliao, who quickly pulled her into a warm embrace to calm her down. Don't cry, she whispered. Sio Noana is the most obedient girl I know. She reminded her that her brother was also a big celebrity now. If there were any bullies harassing her at school, she should tell her brother boldly. She promised that she and her brother would join forces to help her get justice. While she was comforting her, Muliao's gaze happened to fall upon the coffee table. There sat an old phone with its screen still glowing. Noticing the style and the worn-out cartoon case, Muliao sat closer to the coffee table while continuing to soothe the child. It appeared to be the spare phone that her mother had left behind. She had left it at home specifically to make it easier to stay in contact with the children. Suspecting this chat group had something to do with Sio Nuana's distress, she picked up the phone without hesitation. We see a pinned announcement at the top of the group. Good evening, parents. To promote the tradition of respecting teachers. It explained that some committee members decided, with Teachers' Day approaching, to honor Mr. Zahn for his hard work. They plan to organize a thank you banquet and prepare several high-end, exquisite gifts to express their feelings. The cost would be split equally among the 43 students, requiring an upfront payment of 93 yuan from each parent. Please respond actively with your transfers, the message concluded. And please acknowledge once you have received this message. Sujio Noana curled up in Muliao's warm embrace and told her about all the mistreatment she had suffered during this time. She looked up and asked if she was truly stupid, a question no child that age should ever have to ask. She explained that Mr. Zahn once scolded her in front of the whole class every day, even threatening to expel her from school. Muliao frowned instantly upon hearing this, her protective instincts kicking in. Based on Sujio Noana's age, we know she is still only in the early grades of elementary school. With the 9-year compulsory education law as protection, she wondered where a simple teacher found the power to force a student out. Was it really about performance, or was it because her mother hadn't paid the flattery money, leading to the girl being bullied? Muliao gently stroked her head and comforted her, assuring her that Sio Nuana wasn't foolish at all. She told her quite clearly that she believed she was the smartest little girl she knew. That wicked teacher, she insisted, was definitely just trying to scare her. After all, how could a principal ever be willing to expel such a sensible and obedient child? Sujio Nuana's dull eyes seemed to brighten for a moment upon hearing those words. But the light was soon eclipsed by doubt, as she whispered that Mr. Zahn was actually very strict. He had forced her to stand as punishment several times during class just this week. He would tear up her notebooks in public and scold her, calling her completely incorrigible. Last week, he even forced her to move her seat to the back corner, saying mediocre students only deserve to be by the trash can. Mu Liao was both indignant and utterly stunned as she listened to these revelations. It seemed professional ethics had deteriorated so much that a teacher's own distorted views were being taken out on a child. She knew all too well that a child's environment can have a fatal impact on their self-confidence. To destroy a child's self-esteem so viciously, well, it made her wonder how such trash could be called a role model. But we have to wonder, what kind of deep-seated grudge could lead a person to such an extreme? It couldn't simply be because she wasn't a model student or because he just didn't like her. Mu Liao simply couldn't understand it. Who could possibly hate such a small, obedient girl? Under her gentle persuasion, CEO Nuana finally decided to tell her the truth. It turns out Mr. Zanwen was always promoting his private after-school tutoring classes during every parent-teacher meeting. He demanded that all the students go there to do their homework once the school day was over. Perhaps the tutoring fee was simply too expensive for their modest budget. The girl knew her mother already worked hard enough taking on every odd job she could find. She didn't want her to carry any extra burden, so she never mentioned the classes to her mother. Mu Liao had a sudden realization as she listened to the child's heartbreaking explanation. Recalling those who forced others to buy gifts in the group chat, she finally understood the motives of this blood-sucking teacher. Looking around the simple but tidy rented house, she felt the weight of the hardships Su Ilan had faced raising her children alone. CEO Nuana clearly understood the reality of her family's poverty far better than a child should. Her mother, naturally, had been kept in the dark and knew absolutely nothing about the situation. As a result, that man's petty malice was unleashed entirely upon the innocent Xianwan. She told her not to be afraid, promising that her big sister was here for her now. She asked if she had any idea just how incredible her brother had become lately. She wanted her to know just how powerful and amazing her brother was now. Yes, she made sure the girl understood that her brother was now a force to be reckoned with. Mu Liao nodded with a smile, but then her gaze fell upon an upright piano in the corner, and for a moment, she was completely stunned. The piano's body was polished to a shine, its black and white keys standing in sharp contrast to the simplicity of the rented house. Little Su Xianwan couldn't wait to climb onto the piano stool, her excitement practically radiating off her. She proudly explained that the piano was a birthday gift from her brother, asking if she thought it was beautiful. She mentioned how she cleans it every single day, and Mu Liao moved closer to sit by her side. She agreed that it was indeed beautiful, noting just how wonderful her brother was to her. Su Xianwan chose a melody and set up her phone to record, while Mu Liao made a gesture and stayed to help. Mu Liao leaned in with a smile, telling the girl she would lower the tone to provide the chord accompaniment. She encouraged her to play the melody boldly, telling her not to be afraid of making a mistake. And so, Su Xianwan lifted her head with a newfound sense of confidence. A crisp, clear melody began to resonate throughout the small room. As she listened, Mu Liao felt her vision start to grow blurry with emotion. In that moment, she saw a reflection of her own younger, proud self within Xianwan. The same slender fingers, the same tender touch, and that same fearless confidence in front of the camera. This particular melody also happened to stir up some very deep, buried memories. She recalled the strict selection process at the conservatory and the desperate lengths Mukin went to just to secure a spot for her. She remembered him kneeling in the heavy snow on the cold theater steps, shivering like a beggar, all for her sake. The simple piece of music had already ended, yet Mu Liao remained frozen, her hands still suspended in midair. She snapped back to reality suddenly when she heard Xianwan calling out to her, asking what was wrong. She quickly apologized, admitting she had simply gotten lost in her own thoughts for a moment. She told the girl that she had played beautifully, noting that Xianwan truly possessed a remarkable talent. Xianwan's eyes lit up instantly, as being praised by a music master was no small thing for her. But in the middle of this warm moment, Mu Liao's phone began to vibrate frantically. She answered with a quiet hello, only to be met by a furious voice shouting from the other end. The caller demanded to know where on earth she was, asking if she had forgotten today's major announcement. Apparently, the entire production team was standing by, waiting specifically for her to begin filming. Mu Liao was visibly startled by the outburst. Her peaceful afternoon suddenly shattered. She checked the date on her phone, and, all at once, the reality of the situation hit her. To be honest, these recent days of suffering and torment had completely turned her sense of time upside down. She hurried to apologize to the music master, promising that she would arrive at the studio immediately. We see her hesitate, however, as Xianwan still had no idea when her brother would be returning home. If she stayed to wait, it might be midnight before he arrived, but her professional schedule was already in flames. Just as she was about to say a hurried goodbye, she happened to spot a pill bottle in the trash can. She picked it up with a sharp, observant eye and asked the girl what kind of medicine it was. Xianwan explained she had found the empty bottle while cleaning under her brother's bed and had simply tossed it out. Mu Liao turned the bottle over in her hands, searching for the label to see what it contained. But as she looked closer, she realized that the label had been intentionally and cleanly torn off. Her heart sank. She took a photo of the bottle and sent it directly to a renowned medical expert. The old professor enlarged the image on his screen, examining every detail with professional care. He concluded that while the label was gone, the bottle's shape suggested it was a powerful liver protection medication. Upon hearing the word liver, the growing sense of dread in Mu Liao's heart was fully confirmed. It fit perfectly, as Mu Chen's high school physical exam had clearly stated that malnutrition had caused severe liver damage. She asked the expert if he could verify exactly what kind of specialized medication it was. He instructed her to lean in and see if she could catch any residual scent from the neck of the bottle. And so, Mu Liao opened the cap and took a deep, cautious breath. A sharp, bitter aroma immediately spread through her senses, rising all the way to the top of her head. It was the kind of bitterness that seemed to travel through the nasal cavity and strike directly at the heart. She told the professor that the smell was far too complex for her to describe accurately. Regardless, just catching the scent of this medicine left a dry, astringent feeling in the back of her throat. The expert told her to bring the bottle to his lab, where he could analyze the residual powder to identify the specific drug. We returned to the editing room at the NTA branch, where a staff member was asking Mu Chun for his opinion on the effects. The editor wanted to know if the splicing and transitions were meeting his high expectations. The post-production worker had pulled several highlights from the live broadcast specifically to consult with him. But just as Mu Chun opened his mouth to offer suggestions for the modifications, a strange, intense itch flared up from deep within his throat. His hands fumbled through his pockets with a slight tremor until the woman beside him quickly handed him some warm water. He forced himself to swallow a handful of pills, the desperation of the moment clear in his eyes. Zhen Jiasu, who was standing nearby, watched this unfold with a deep, troubled frown. He couldn't be sure if he was being overly sensitive or if his mind was simply playing tricks on him. But looking at the young man's face after taking the pills, he felt he could smell the faint, chilling breath of impending death. Deep down, he felt quite clearly as if his body were riddled with holes. Zhen Jiasu stared intently at the medications Mu Chun was clutching tightly in his hand. Even though the labels on the medicine had been carefully obscured, nothing could truly be hidden. He was deliberately destroying himself, and even a blind man could see those weren't simple cold capsules. This realization caused the confusion in Zhen Jiasu's mind to grow more overwhelming by the second. After all, the young man's heart had only been beating for a little over 20 years. How could his bodily functions have deteriorated to such a miserable, tragic state? Master Mu Chun, he asked, is your body truly all right? The violent coughing fit finally subsided after he managed to swallow that handful of pills. Slowly, he lifted his head to look at the girl who had handed him the water. And there, we see the dazzling face of the young woman revealed to him. She stood over 1.7 meters tall, possessing a striking and elegant figure. Her presence was undeniable, and her peach blossom eyes were filled with a look of sincere, deep-seated concern. Her pure and beautiful facial features were complemented by a touch of truly exquisite makeup. It was immediately obvious that she was no ordinary behind-the-scenes worker. At that moment, a middle-aged agent approached and asked, Master Mu Chun, are you interested in singer variety shows? He explained that Jia Yuxuan was his #1 fan and had come to the building specifically to invite him to play in the finals. Mu Chun had barely caught his breath, and in his confusion, he didn't associate the beauty before him with the famous celebrity. Zhen Jiasu was gesturing frantically from the side to remind him that this woman's background was incredibly prestigious. Her mother was a legendary pop queen, and she was a rising star herself. Zhen Jiasu knew Mu Chun desperately needed the money. He was trying to shove this mountain of money right into my hands, winking frantically to get me to take the bait, even though Xia Yuxuan's singing wasn't exactly top-tier talent. But with that kind of financial backing, she was a guaranteed gold mine. As long as I went on stage to play the piano, the payment would be astronomical. It was a figure ordinary people wouldn't dare imagine, yet no one expected me to refuse outright, leaving the middle-aged agent's face turning dark with frustration. He didn't expect that after she humbled herself to come in person, this rookie would dare show no gratitude, slamming the door right in their faces and trampling his pride. The atmosphere in the room plummeted to freezing. However, Xia Yuxuan, despite her pampered reputation, didn't get angry and simply waved for her livid staff to withdraw. She admitted she had been abrupt in disturbing him without an appointment, and while this latest coughing fit wasn't as heart-wrenching as the last, Zhen Jiasu was still terrified. She had spotted alarming traces of dark red blood on my fingers. In reality, I was coughing up blood in public, my face as pale as a sheet of paper. Seeing my sickly, bloodless appearance, Xia Yuxuan and Zhen Jiasu reached for their phones to call emergency services, but I wiped the blood away as if nothing had happened. I raised my bloodshot eyes and looked at Xia Yuxuan, suggesting that instead of playing the piano, I could write a song for her instead. The suggestion hung in the air like a strange rumor, leaving the others in a state of complete confusion as they tried to process the sudden change in the situation. They wondered why I would make such an offer, especially while I was clearly struggling just to breathe and leaning heavily against the counter for support. To be honest, even if I knew a bit about composition, Xia Yuxuan's mother had golden connections that reached every corner of the industry. What kind of legendary, top-tier producer could she not invite with a single phone call? There was no reason for them to look at a song written at random, but the surprise hit them as fast as a tornado. Xia Yuxuan stopped in her tracks the moment she heard the proposal. Her interest peaked. A look of immense surprise washed over her beautiful face, replacing her previous concern. "Master Mu Chun," she asked, "are you truly willing to custom design a song just for me?" I gave a weak nod and borrowed a pen from a nearby employee, my movements slow and deliberate. Enduring a sharp, stabbing pain in my liver, I began to scribble frantically on a piece of scrap paper. Xia Yuxuan, standing by my side and watching me work, immediately noticed that something about my focus had completely changed. She saw that Mu Chen's forehead was covered in a cold sweat, a clear sign of the intense pain he was enduring. "Master Mu Chun," she whispered, "your face looks truly terrible right now." She suggested that if his body really couldn't handle it, they could easily reschedule the songwriting for another day. He simply told her it was fine and asked her to wait in silence for just 20 minutes. After those 20 minutes, he handed Xia Yuxuan the draft, which was now completely covered in musical notes. He told her to take a look at the style first, just in case it didn't quite suit her taste. Xia Yuxuan took the draft from him, standing perfectly still as if she had been frozen in place. Watching this, Zheng Jiaxu could only shake his head in secret, certain that things were about to go south. Deep down, he expected it to be a disaster, though he felt that was only natural under the circumstances. After all, it was a piece written in 20 minutes by a man clearly suffering from a physical breakdown. How could anyone expect the lyrics or the melody to be anything remotely impressive? And yet, Xia Yuxuan remained there, unable to utter a single word to the people around her. The truth was, she was completely and utterly stunned by the song written on that scrap of paper. She couldn't fathom how this young man had composed such an intricate, mature melody and high-quality lyrics in so little time. Suppressing her growing excitement, she began to hum a few lines while following the sheet music. In her mind, the melody and the lyrics fit together with a perfection that was almost haunting. It was then she realized her gamble had paid off. She had stumbled upon a genuine, hidden treasure. This was, without a doubt, a high-quality track destined to dominate the music charts. Mu Chen looked at her and asked once more if she intended to stay or if she would be leaving. "On this windy day, I tried to take your hand, but the rain became so heavy I could no longer see you." As Xia Yuxuan began to softly hum the melody, we see her expression shift from pure shock to a state of absolute, ecstatic joy. By the time she reached the climax of the chorus, she realized her previous assessment of it being just a high-quality hit was far too modest. This was clearly a masterpiece, the kind of golden track destined to sweep every award in the industry. She loved it with every fiber of her being, and Mu Chun simply nodded, noting that as long as the payment was right, the song was hers. Meanwhile, the construction of the sports center was scheduled to be completed in just 3 days. Backstage at the singing competition finals, the director urged her, "Miss Xia, please get ready to take the stage." He informed her that the accompaniment for her planned song, "See You Te Maru," had been perfectly adjusted for the performance. He even asked if she needed one last rehearsal to familiarize herself with the track before the cameras started rolling. To his surprise, Xia Yuxuan shook her head with absolute, unwavering decision. She declared she would no longer be singing that worn-out song, words that hit the room like a sudden bolt of lightning. The director was so startled, he nearly dropped his walkie-talkie right then and there. After all, "See You Te Maru" was supposed to be her ace in the hole, the track she intended to use to dominate the charts. This was the live final, broadcast to the entire network, and her arch-rival, Mu Yao, was already preparing in the very next dressing room. Everyone had taken it for granted that she would use her signature song to face her greatest enemy in this final showdown. Imagine the scene, a major star deciding to change her entire repertoire just 10 minutes before the competition begins. Ignoring the director's visible mental collapse, Xia Yuxuan moved forward with her plan. She essentially forced the production team to swap the tracks, leaving them with no choice but to follow her lead. She then headed straight to the backstage control room to give the live band an intense, high-speed masterclass on the new arrangement. She dictated exactly when the drums should kick in during the main melody to properly elevate the atmosphere. And she specified which sections of the chorus required ethereal backing vocals and layered harmonies to achieve the perfect sound. Who would have expected such precise, professional instructions? Xia Yuxuan's sudden masterclass left the seasoned music veterans in the room completely stunned. They discovered, much to their surprise, that her detailed modifications were like a divine touch, fitting the song's melancholic atmosphere perfectly. The general director, San Hong Yuan, simply couldn't contain his curiosity any longer and had to ask, "Did you write this heavenly song yourself?" he inquired, looking toward the young man standing nearby. "I haven't yet had the pleasure of learning the name of such a distinguished master," he added politely. He looked Mu Chun up and down as if seeing a monster, and the more he looked, the more familiar the face became. As he noted those delicate features, a spark of realization flashed in his mind, and he finally found the answer. Wasn't this the genius grassroots pianist who had been trending all over the hot search lists recently? As the thought took hold, San Hong Yuan took a deep breath, feeling his entire worldview begin to crumble. It turned out this boy didn't just play the piano with astonishing skill, he was much more than that. He could write classical masterpieces that sold for exorbitant prices, and he could even compose pop hits and handle full arrangements. We are looking at a true hexagonal genius, an all-rounder so rare that one might only appear once in a century. Why on earth had no one in the industry ever heard of him before this moment? Could it be that the boy had been intentionally hiding his talent and playing the fool all along? Mu Chen's throat felt dry, but before he even had a chance to respond, others spoke up for him. Xia Yuxuan and her assistant, Poyato, jumped in to explain that this was Master Mu Chen, who had custom-made the song for her. She made it very clear that the exclusive copyright for this track had already been sold to them. She wasn't about to let anyone snatch it away. After all, she had already paid the deposit to secure it. Upon hearing this, Sanhong Yuan sighed with heavy regret, his face clouding over with a sense of missed opportunity. To be honest, after hearing that chorus just once, he would have rushed to buy the rights himself if he'd had the chance. Feeling quite helpless, Sanhong Yuan could only pull the team aside and make them promise to prioritize his future works above all else. After that, Mu Chen quickly settled all the remaining details for the song's accompaniment. Xia Yuxuan, perhaps fearing he might change his mind, insisted on personally escorting him all the way to the door. Master Mu Chen, please take care. We will discuss the contract details and fees tomorrow in a much quieter place, she said warmly. She even promised that, when the time came, she would take the initiative to go and pick him up herself. Words cannot express my gratitude for your kindness. I truly, truly love this song, she added with a smile. Mu Chen didn't seem to mind the praise, simply waving his hand to show he had heard her. He scanned a shared bicycle nearby and began pedaling away, leaving the studio behind him. As she watched his figure disappearing into the distance on that bike, Xia Yuxuan felt her cheeks flush with a soft blush. This scene, which looked like a farewell from a touching idol drama, was witnessed by Mu Liao, who had just arrived at the stadium. Through the car window, she saw him chatting and laughing with her greatest archenemy. In that moment, Mu Liao felt as if someone had reached out and squeezed her heart with incredible force. She was overcome by the sudden, sinking feeling that an invaluable treasure had been stolen right from under her nose. A fierce, possessive urge took hold of her, causing Mu Liao to clench her fists until her knuckles turned white. As soon as the car door opened, she practically ran towards Xia Yuxuan, her eyes flashing with anger. How shameless! Why are you hanging around Mu Chen? What kind of shady business are you two plotting behind my back? She demanded. Xia Yuxuan was left momentarily stunned by the sudden, aggressive interrogation. But when faced with such a direct provocation from her nemesis, she remembered she was a young lady who didn't take insults lightly. She wasn't about to swallow such a slight. Besides, that accusatory tone made her feel more than a little disgusted. What kind of relationship I have with Mu Chen is none of your business. Why do you even care? She shot back. Aren't you being a bit too nosy? Who exactly do you think you are? She added, her voice sharp. At those words, Mu Liao felt a sudden wave of bitterness surge through her mind. It was as if someone had stolen her favorite childhood doll right out of her hands. And to make matters worse, the thief was now arrogantly mocking her, claiming the doll never belonged to her at all. Driven by this, Mu Liao lifted her head high, determined to declare her sovereignty once and for all. I am his legitimate sister, she stated, a claim that left Xia Yuxuan utterly stunned for several long seconds. Her mind raced through her mental database of gossip until she finally remembered a specific admission Mu Liao had made. In a past interview, she had mentioned having a brother she considered completely useless. When we combine that with the recent online revelations regarding Mu Chen's true origins over the last few days, it became clear that the wealthy family who had ruthlessly cast him out was, in fact, the Mu family. Xia Yuxuan stood frozen as she processed the logic, her initial shock quickly transforming into a cold, simmering anger. She immediately felt a deep sense of indignation over the blatant injustice Mu Chen had suffered. To think that a person so brilliant, a man now courted by everyone in the industry, could be treated this way. This was the same man who had shared family bonds under the same roof with them for over 20 years. And yet, they had turned their backs on him in an instant, throwing him away as if he were nothing but trash. One has to wonder, what on earth is going on inside the heads of the people in the Mu family? Back on the red carpet, I remember talking to you about your brother, Xia Yuxuan recalled pointedly. She reminded her how she'd spoken with disgust, calling him a stain on her life and insulting him as a country bumpkin. She had been so desperate to sever the tie, to erase the very idea of what her brother represented to her. Besides, as we know, she had already cruelly kicked him out of the Mu family home without a second thought. And you even pulled strings to cruelly erase his very name from the family registry. Now, you actually have the nerve to stand here in front of me and lecture me. Where were you before? Why are you acting like a saint all of a sudden? He is a free man now, and to be honest, he has absolutely nothing to do with you. Mu Liao found herself completely speechless under this relentless barrage of questions. Her arrogance deflated instantly like a punctured balloon, because every word Xia Yuxuan spoke was both true and sharp. Before, she had been blinded by false appearances and held deeply distorted prejudices. She had been blind to his efforts and his kindness, viewing him only as a parasitic burden and a stranger. In public, she had never once mentioned his existence, not even a whisper. Very few people in the entertainment industry even knew that Mu Liao had a younger brother. As she recalled her confused past, Mu Liao's eyes began to redden with unshed tears. To protect her fragile self-esteem, she insisted stubbornly on her position. No matter what happens, she told herself, he is still my brother by blood. She vowed to do everything in her power to reverse the situation and beg him to return. Xia Yuxuan saw that Mu Liao was on the verge of collapsing and breaking into tears. After years of fighting, it was the very first time she had seen her rival with such red, tearful eyes. She even felt this pathetic woman was a bit pitiable and didn't bother rubbing more salt in the wound. The two of them fell into a suffocating silence that lasted for more than 10 long seconds. Mu Liao took a deep breath and regained her composure, as if she had just made an extremely difficult decision. She finally asked about the problem that had been haunting her heart, the one she hadn't dared to face. Was Mao Chun just helping you play the piano a moment ago? She asked. Xia Yuxuan flashed a smile that was, quite frankly, sharp enough to kill. You're mistaken, she replied. He actually wrote a song specifically for me. Not long after, the grand finale of the singing competition finally began. We see countless media outlets rushing to report on this massive event. Mu Liao's gaze remained fixed solely on the stage, waiting for what was to come. The first person to step onto the stage to perform was none other than Xia Yuxuan. On the stage, the soft lights flickered and danced in an alternating rhythm. A melodious, winding song soon echoed throughout the entire venue. The lyrics spoke of longing. Don't come back, though I wish I could ask if you'll stay or go. On the day you left, I tried to take your hand, but a heavy snow fell and clouded my vision. This performance caused the expressions of the audience and the singers backstage to shift as the song gradually intensified. As Xia Yuxuan reached the climax, several singers stood up to stare at the stage until her ethereal voice slowly faded. The entire audience was shocked by this surprise and instinctively stood up to clap and cheer. To be honest, the song was simply incredible, and the lyrics were written with haunting beauty. Fans shouted their support for Xia Yuxuan, moved by the exquisite song and her perfect interpretation. It sparked a genuine frenzy among the crowd gathered below the stage. Many people even felt that describing these lyrics as merely outstanding was a bit of an understatement. It was like a beautiful poem, and even the notoriously picky music critics found it difficult to find any faults. Because, at the end of the day, this song was simply too impressive to ignore. Not to mention that Xia Yuxuan mastered the performance perfectly, even if there had been a tiny mistake somewhere in the middle. The sheer quality of this song was enough to carry the entire stage on its own. In hindsight, they probably shouldn't have let Xia Yuxuan perform first. The audience was so thoroughly captivated by such a flawless performance. After that, who would really be in the mood to listen to anyone else sing? No one noticed that, tucked away in the corner, Mu Liao's eyes were turning red once again. Hearing this moving song, he was certain that the Mr. Su mentioned was him, and only he could have written such a melody. This realization caused waves of indescribable emotion to surge deep within Mu Liao's heart. Now, those enviable achievements have turned into a great honor, and the song itself has become a symbol of that prestige. It seems everyone still carries a shadow of his work. She has sung so many songs that he originally wrote. Every single one of those songs had gone on to top the major music charts. But he had always hidden quietly behind the scenes, leaving all the spotlight and glory for her. As he thought about this, Mu Liao's emotional composure finally collapsed. His tears began to fall, like pearls scattering from a broken necklace. He wondered what would have happened to the younger brother who loved him so deeply if he hadn't been there all along. Today, all the praise showered upon Xia Yuxuan, and even this sunny day itself, originally belonged to him. Suddenly, a brilliant light struck the very center of the stage. Once Mu Liao appeared on stage, the applause from the audience simply refused to stop. Even some of the most die-hard fans were still shouting his name at the top of their lungs from below the stage. They had watched him transform from an ugly duckling into the glamorous queen he is today. Because of this, many people could empathize with him, though they never stopped to wonder why he was actually so talented. They simply took it for granted, assuming Mu Liao had reached his current heights solely through his own individual merits. On stage at this very moment, he seemed lost, remembering all the encouragement he had received over the years. He recalled their meeting during the initial audition, the painful scene where he had been cruelly eliminated in the first round. A song had been written specifically for him back then. It was meant to encourage him never to give up, even when he felt utterly exhausted. We see many spectators in the hall straightening up in their seats as he prepares to sing. It was clear that many people still held incredibly high expectations for him. They hoped his star power might eclipse Xia Yuxuan, but to be honest, they were probably expecting too much. The song Mu Liao performed this time was an older track he had released a few months prior. His entire performance was visibly affected by his emotions, leading to a few nearly imperceptible flaws. And just like the singers who came before him, his set lacked any real element of surprise. Consequently, even his longtime fans in the livestream chat weren't acting with their usual fervor. Instead, they were frantically posting the word champion in support of his rival. The staff then began the rapid process of counting the final votes. 10 minutes later, the general director stepped forward to make the announcement personally. The final champion was Xia Yuxuan, winning with the song titled Sunny Day. As soon as the director's voice trailed off, the entire stage transformed into a carnival for Xia Yuxuan. While she fully enjoyed the cheers and applause, Mu Liao left the venue looking completely dejected. It is a bitter irony, really, when you realize that all the glory on display used to belong to him. A profound sense of bitterness flooded Mu Liao's heart as he watched the celebration. And right at that moment, we see a middle-aged man suddenly rush out from the crowd. His expression was manic, and he began shouting at the top of his lungs. He claimed he had traveled from very far away just to buy a ticket to see him. He demanded to know if this performance was worth his money, though he hadn't actually touched Mu Liao yet. The security staff already had him firmly pinned down, but Mu Liao witnessed a truly disappointing scene. At the exact second the middle-aged man had started his desperate run toward them, Mu Xian had instinctively stepped aside to protect herself, leaving him exposed. Mu Liao's expression instantly turned melancholy as he processed her reaction. He told himself that if he were in her shoes, he certainly wouldn't have hidden like that. After Mu Yulu sent Mu Liao home, he took Mu Xian to buy a car, planning to gift her a Rolls-Royce. It was on the way there that they happened to cross paths with Mu Chun. An extremely luxurious sedan pulled up directly in front of him, completely blocking his path. Mu Yulu and Mu Xian stepped out, having decided it was time for her to apologize and settle the matter from years ago. They believed this was necessary so that she could finally feel completely at ease in her heart. A trace of disgust flashed in Mu Xian's eyes first, as she felt that speaking to someone like him was beneath her. But to ensure he never returned to the Mu household, she decided to play her part and act the role of the penitent. She called out to brother Mu Chun, admitting that framing him all those years ago had been wrong. She claimed she was facing unspeakable hardships and had simply done something foolish in a moment of confusion. She told him that as long as he could forgive her, she would accept any punishment he chose to give. She went on to say she hoped her sisters would feel the same, but before Mu Xian could finish her hypocritical speech, Mu Chun simply shoved her away. She stumbled, nearly hitting the ground, and her face instantly twisted into an ugly expression as her body instinctively curled inward. Mu Yulu reacted immediately, stepping forward to shield Mu Xian behind her. She demanded to know what on earth he was trying to do, wondering if she had given Mu Chun far too much freedom lately. This sudden outburst caught her off guard. How could this outsider dare to act so recklessly in her presence? Mu Xian, playing her part, told her sister not to blame brother Mu Chun, claiming it was only natural for him to harbor such anger. She insisted it was all her fault, struggling to maintain her composure while doing her best to look absolutely pitiful. This display of false humility, of course, only served to make Mu Yulu even more furious with him. She snapped at Mu Chun to look at himself, asking what kind of person he had become. She told him she was ashamed of his behavior, especially his habit of pushing people around whenever he felt like it. She wondered aloud who could ever like someone like him, and ordered him to apologize to his younger brother immediately. Seeing her once again adopt that condescending tone of an elder trying to educate him, Mu Chun looked at her as if she were a complete idiot. He calmly reminded President Mu that he didn't recall her ever liking him much in the past anyway. Furthermore, he asked if she was deaf, pointing out that Mu Xian herself had said he could hit or scold her if he wished. He questioned why she was jumping to conclusions and interfering with such unnecessary haste. Upon hearing this, Mu Yulu was so consumed by rage that she felt as though she might actually vomit blood. And yet, to her frustration, she truly couldn't find a single word to refute his logic. We remember that when he lived in the Mu household, he was always obedient to his elder sisters and never dared to fight back. It seemed clear to him that they still harbored a deep hatred for him, treating him like a total stranger. Besides, because of the deep-seated prejudices in her heart, she had never hesitated to use corporal punishment against him before. She told him she knew he felt deeply wronged, but insisted that he simply couldn't go around hurting people whenever he pleased. To her, his behavior was just too much, but Mu Chun didn't even bother to argue. He simply hopped on his bike to leave. Seeing that he actually dared to ignore her, she immediately barked at him to stop right where he was. She threatened that if he dared to walk away today, he should never expect her to recognize him as her younger brother again. After she spat out those angry words, a heavy silence hung in the air for a moment. Mu Chun, who was already pedaling away, actually paused for a brief second. This small gesture caused Mu Yulu's temper to cool slightly, as she likely expected a change of heart. But what happened next infuriated her so much that she dug her nails into her own palms. With his back still turned, he simply showed her his middle finger and rode off without a single glance behind him. We shift our gaze elsewhere, where Yi Qingguan is watching the video of the finals online. The praise for Xia Yuxuan across the internet was absolutely overwhelming, to say the least. Beyond the compliments on her stage presence and the quality of the song, a certain gossipy trend began to emerge. Rumors were swirling that Xia Yuxuan and the piano genius were in a very close relationship. The two had entered the venue together, and when it was over, Xia Yuxuan had even personally seen him out. And the reason this topic became so popular was largely due to the photos attached to the posts. Looking at the specific angles from which the photos were taken, the narrative seemed quite clear. They seemed almost glued together upon entry, and a second photo showed Xia Yuxuan smiling sweetly while waving him goodbye. As she stared at Xia Yuxuan's elegant appearance in the photo, she remembered everything she had once been told. In that moment, all of her beautiful fantasies seemed to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Immediately after that, she saw the official photo that had been released to the public. Xia Yuxuan stood silently on the stage, bathed in beams of light, though her expression seemed almost like a joke. She sat there on the stage, remaining perfectly still as the cameras captured her every move. She continued to sit there, lost in the moment, while the audience watched her every gesture with bated breath. By now, a flood of comments had already begun to appear beneath these photos. The most liked comment of all consisted of just one simple word: perfect. Furthermore, certain insiders began to reveal the entire process of how she became the face of the brand. They went so far as to write a lengthy, 1,000-word post detailing the brand's journey. It claimed the talented composer, Chen Dian, had written a masterpiece, a golden song the likes of which hadn't been seen in 20 years. Naturally, numerous singers were practically fighting one another for the chance to collaborate on it. This golden song was the most sought-after piece on all major platforms, yet every single request for it was flatly rejected. The genius composer told everyone quite clearly that this was a song written for her, and her alone. As she read this, Yi Qingwan found herself remembering the past, back when she finally got 2 tickets and dragged him to a concert. At that time, the entire venue was a sea of pink and silver glow sticks. The whole night sky seemed to glow with a soft pink hue. Under the moonlight, the singer on stage was pouring their heart out, singing at the top of their lungs. She thought it was absolutely incredible, and, without even thinking, she spoke her mind. She told him that if she could ever be like that singer and hold her own concert, it would be wonderful. His expression back then was quite serious as he told her she would need her own hit song first. He then asked, what if he wrote her an unparalleled golden song in the future, one that every singer would fight over? She truly believed him. She even blushed, admitting she had no talent for singing and would have to practice very hard. Otherwise, she told herself, she would simply be wasting a perfectly good song. But now, everything has changed. He had indeed written a song for just one person, but that person wasn't her. As Yi Qingwan thought of this, that indescribable feeling of sadness began to swell in her heart once more. Subconsciously, we see her click on the chat box, looking for a sign of life. Compared to those online photos that were making her so jealous, nothing quite compared to the cold reality that he still hadn't replied to her message. In that moment, the tightly wound string in her heart finally snapped. After deleting him from her friends list, she hid under the covers and collapsed into a state of pure grief. The stabbing pain in her chest was so sharp that Yi Qingwan found herself regretting ever meeting him. We return to her past, back when she was still in high school. She used to receive love letters from her classmates all the time. Back then, her mother warned her sternly that if she didn't study hard, she'd end up back in that tiny town without even a cinema. And so, being a dutiful daughter, Yi Qingwan always listened to her mother's advice. She treated those early sparks of romance like a deadly poison, even tearing up the notes right in the boys' faces. She began to deliberately keep her distance from any and all boys. That is, until she met him. In her original plan, she was meant to stay single until her career was stable. The idea was to wait for the right age and let her family elders introduce her to someone reliable. But his sudden appearance in her life made her start to feel cautious and uncertain. It made her worry about her appearance, something she had never really bothered with before. And for the first time, she felt that irresistible urge to constantly reach out and respond to him. For the very first time, she experienced that cold panic, the paralyzing fear of having something to lose. Even in this painful moment, Yi Qingwan could still feel the lingering beauty of that sentiment. It was like being in a warm, blooming spring, with white and pink petals falling gently upon her heart. But his sudden coldness and their farewell instantly transformed all that beauty into a bitter poison. She wondered why this was happening as her tears began to fall once more, seemingly without end. Deep down, even a faint trace of hatred began to stir within her heart. She asked herself why he would give her such beauty, only to cruelly shatter it with his own hands. On the following day, we see Xia Yuxuan and Mukin meeting at a cafe to discuss the copyright price for the song. She noted that while she truly wished to buy the rights to Sunny Day outright, he would likely earn less money that way. She explained that in just 2 or 3 years, the continuous royalties would far exceed a one-time buyout fee. Because she genuinely hoped for a long-term partnership, she honestly laid out all the pros and cons before they signed. Mukin simply shook his head gently, telling her that 2 or 3 years was far too long for him. He confessed he really couldn't wait that long, a statement that left Xia Yuxuan completely stunned. In her eyes, his impatience made no sense, especially considering his connection to the Mu family. He had already earned over 4 million from his piano pieces, so why couldn't he wait a few years for more? She wondered if his need for the money was truly that urgent. He insisted that the matter was decided and that they should proceed with the signing immediately. As they signed, she felt a sudden, sharp pang of worry, as if she had been pricked by a needle. Afterward, Mukin spoke with the cafe owner for a while and actually put on a trainee's apron. It seemed that since he hadn't seen Xia Yuxuan yet, he simply couldn't bring himself to wait around. She had never seen him go out to work just to earn money before. Immediately, she approached him and asked in a low, quiet voice. She wondered if he had encountered some difficulty that was simply too hard to overcome. She offered to lend him money for emergencies, though she knew that deep down, he was a man of great pride. And so, she quickly softened her tone to avoid wounding his ego. Upon hearing that familiar voice, Yi Qingguan paused for a brief, almost imperceptible moment. A moment later, she spotted Xia Yuxuan standing not very far away. Seeing Xia Yuxuan and Mukin talking and laughing so affectionately caused her repressed emotions to finally explode. She told him to stay away, insisting she didn't need him meddling in her life. He suddenly fell heavily to the ground, and Xia Yuxuan rushed forward to help him back up. His forehead was covered in sweat, and he could barely stand, yet he still struggled to explain that he had simply lost his balance. When Yi Qingguan saw him fall so hard, she felt a sharp, sympathetic pang of pain in her own body. She had once desperately accompanied him to the hospital, yet now, she had been the one to push him down with her own hands. Instinctively, Yi Qingguan wanted to step forward and show her concern, but Xia Yuxuan had already beaten her to it. With her eyes red from crying, Yi Qingguan turned, opened the door, and ran out of the cafe. After they sat back down, Xia Yuxuan couldn't help but ask if Professor Mukin was truly all right. She asked if there was a misunderstanding, having already guessed the true nature of their relationship. She noted that the occasional argument is perfectly normal between a couple, which, in any other case, might have been true. He waved his hand, dismissively, and was just about to say something in response. Suddenly, his throat began to itch, and he found he couldn't stop himself from vomiting. This time, Xia Yuxuan clearly saw the traces of blood staining the handkerchief. "Professor Mukin, we need to get you to the hospital right now," she insisted. He originally wanted to find an excuse to brush it off, but then he couldn't help but cough violently twice more. And this time, the coughing fit left the entire handkerchief soaked in blood. Xia Yuxuan, acting decisively and without waiting for permission, immediately pulled out her phone to call an ambulance. To prevent her from wasting any more time, he decided it was finally time to tell her the truth. The doctor had diagnosed a terminal illness, telling him to eat well and do whatever he wished during the year he had left. Upon hearing these grave words, Xia Yuxuan froze, her hand holding the phone suspended midair. Suddenly, she realized why he had said he couldn't wait 2 or 3 years, recalling his previous tragic experiences. Not only had he been heartlessly kicked out of the home he lived in for 20 years, but fate was now treating him just as unfairly. She wanted to say something, anything, that might offer him some small, albeit useless, comfort. She hadn't realized it was a terminal illness until now, but then, she suddenly remembered something important. That girl from earlier had left in such a state of anger because of their misunderstanding. "If that's the case, you should go and explain everything to her clearly," she suggested. He shook his head weakly, feeling that it was entirely his fault for hurting her. After receiving his terminal diagnosis, he had taken the initiative to break up with her himself. Xia Yuxuan remained in a long, heavy silence after hearing his explanation. She understood his motives, yet she didn't entirely agree with them, given he had less than a year to live. To avoid wasting the girl's youth, he chose to leave her, an act of desperate helplessness that most people couldn't endure. The girl felt lost in despair and didn't understand him, but Xia Yuxuan had carefully observed her reaction just moments ago. It was obvious the other girl knew nothing of his terminal illness, as he had deliberately kept his condition a secret from her. Xia Yuxuan, however, simply couldn't understand the logic behind hiding such a heavy burden. She asked why he felt the need to hide it, noting that when they first met, she could sense an indefinable barrier around him. He explained that during their time together, he only shared certain buried memories because her own family tragedies had led her towards self-harm. Furthermore, he felt he couldn't tell her about his illness because she once told him, while he was hospitalized, that if he died, she wouldn't survive without him. And while he knew he shouldn't take such dramatic words literally, deep down, he had a truly bad feeling about it. Changing the subject, he asked if the cafe they were in was actually registered under her name. He hoped she could help him look after the girl in secret, and perhaps find out why she had suddenly arrived and insisted on staying. He also made her promise to keep his terminal illness a matter of absolute confidentiality. This, as it turns out, was the very reason he had chosen to reveal the truth to her in the first place. Xia Yuxuan solemnly agreed, even though hearing about his tortuous experience filled her with a deep sense of anguish. Yet, from a different perspective, she suddenly felt a flicker of envy for the profound bond between the two of them. Perhaps it was because she had entered the cynical world of the entertainment industry at such a young age. To be honest, she had always looked down on the idea of so-called true love. A little later, Xia Yuxuan drove him back home to ensure he arrived safely. Upon arriving, they happened to run into Mu Liao, who had just reached the house herself. She was surprised to see Xia Yuxuan there, but then, her eyes caught the bloodstains on the collar of his shirt. Panicked, she asked how he had gotten blood on his neck and if he was truly all right. She reached out, wanting to open his collar to examine the wound more closely. But instinctively, and perhaps out of fear of the truth, he took a large step back to avoid her touch. He looked at them and asked if he hadn't been clear enough before with what he had already told them. He wondered why they felt the need to come and put on these performances every other day. Upon hearing this, Mu Liao's eyes turned red, filled with a deep sense of grievance. She asked him how he could possibly speak to his own sister in such a harsh tone. She insisted that his sister truly cared about his health, or so she claimed. He replied with a dry smile, saying that in that case, he really ought to thank her. He questioned the meaning of this belated care, recalling the many times he had fainted at home while everyone ignored him. After all, he had stubbornly survived on his own until now, hadn't he? As Mu Liao listened to these words dripping with sarcasm, she felt a sharp, stabbing pain deep within her heart. She told him she realized her mistakes now and suggested they go for a full medical checkup immediately. Xia Yuxuan, who had been watching from the side, found that she simply couldn't stand it anymore. She could tell, just from the brief and icy exchange between the two of them, what his life had been like. It seemed that during all those years with the Mu family, he might have lived as if he were completely worthless. To be honest, it was very likely that his status in that house had been even lower than that of a servant. Because, as we know, even if a household servant were to suddenly collapse, most wealthy young ladies would at least offer a few casual words of concern. But they had never cared about anything. They had never paid the slightest bit of attention to his health before. Perhaps, if they had taken him for a full checkup just a few years earlier, things would be different. His illness might not have worsened to the terminal point it had reached today. And perhaps, he too could have enjoyed a healthy, full life, just like any other ordinary person. What is the point of all this now? If he had only heard these words and felt their concern in the past, he likely would have been overjoyed, lying in bed with a smile for a very long time. But now, everything is simply too late. What use is any of this anymore? Deep down, he knew that once, he would have been truly happy, rejoicing in his room for days. On the way to the hospital, Mu Liao's thoughts had already dissolved into complete chaos. And every time she found herself in this kind of sudden, chaotic situation, her first instinct, quite dependently, was always to think of her eldest sister. Mu Liao fumbled with her phone and quickly dialed Mu Yulu's number. On the other end, Mu Yulu spoke first, mentioning she was just about to call her. She asked where she had gone and told her to hurry back, as her brother had something to ask her. Mu Liao's voice, however, was thick with an obvious, trembling sob. She managed to say she had gone to find Mu Chun, to which her sister snapped, asking why she'd go so far for that ingrate. She reminded her she'd said it 10,000 times. Don't go looking for that ungrateful boy who can't be reasoned with. She even brought up how he had kicked a hooligan the day before, as if that proved her point. To her, it was simply dangerous to be around people with such violent tendencies. As she listened to this, Mu Liao's emotions actually began to settle into a cold, grim calm. Mu Yulu paused, asking if she was actually crying over the phone. She told her to come back and talk, promising her sister would help her vent her frustrations. But then the bombshell dropped. Mu Chun had been fine a second ago, and then he suddenly collapsed. His body is also burning up, terribly hot to the touch. We see that they are now about to rush him to the hospital at full speed. If a serious illness is actually detected, the consequences could be dire. To be honest, I believe Mu Liao is truly paralyzed by a terrible fear right now. She is terrified that she won't even have the chance to make amends for her mistakes. After Mu Yulu heard this, there was a very noticeable pause on the other end. Her tone softened slightly as she told Mu Liao not to think such nonsense. She argued that nothing happens to young boys, suggesting his blood sugar simply dropped from not eating. At most, she figured his early-stage hepatitis had just become a bit more serious. She insisted nothing would happen. He'd just stay in the hospital a few days for some fluids. Besides, she added that even if something was found, it had nothing to do with the Mu family. She told her sister once more that she shouldn't be sitting there imagining things. Seeing that the car had finally reached the hospital, Mu Liao hung up the phone. The doctor who had performed the examination came out and asked if she was the patient's relative. He told her to simply wait for him to wake up and then take him straight home to rest. Upon hearing this, a wave of immense surprise flashed through Mu Liao's heart. She asked the doctor, almost in disbelief, if her brother really didn't have anything serious. Hearing her question, the old professor felt that this particular relative was acting a bit strange. He asked if her brother hadn't mentioned his illness to her before. After all, he had already come in for a checkup just last week. The doctor explained that he had carefully reviewed the latest test results. He insisted it wasn't necessary for him to stay in the hospital or undergo any further examinations. He simply advised her to make sure her little brother kept a positive spirit every single day. Perhaps that might slow the progression of the disease, Mu Liao thought as she listened to the old professor. She felt a suffocating sensation, as if someone were literally strangling her. Her body grew weak, and she collapsed uncontrollably onto the hospital bed. We have to remember that this hospital is already the most prestigious in the entire country. If even here they had given a diagnosis of incurability, the situation was truly grim. Where else could they possibly go to seek treatment in this vast world? Mu Liao felt nothing but a profound, crushing despair in that moment. Suddenly, she recalled something her older sister had mentioned casually during a meal. On that day, her eldest sister had called him to reveal what she claimed was the truth. With cold cruelty, he was told to pack his things and leave the family immediately. As it happened, he had just stepped out of the hospital with the diagnosis of an incurable disease. These timelines fit together with a terrifying perfection. In other words, he had just learned he was terminally ill, a revelation that hit him like a lightning bolt. And right after that, he received the eviction call, the final straw that broke him. Mu Liao pictured the scene in her mind and realized her three sisters had been incredibly cruel. At the most helpless and desperate moment of his entire life, they had all joined forces to ruthlessly throw him out of his own home. And he had simply grit his teeth, enduring all of this in a heavy, painful silence. As Mu Liao realized these details, she could no longer contain herself. Every doubt she held simply vanished. Suddenly, she approached her brother and began to cry inconsolably right there in the hospital room. She truly regretted it, bitterly lamenting the day her eldest sister had whispered those poisonous words in her ear. And she, acting without a heart, had voted in favor of casting him out. Deep down, she hated herself for not recognizing his quiet kindness much sooner. She loathed that she hadn't cared earlier for this brother who had been struggling so hard in silence. If only she had noticed these small details before everything fell apart. She surely would have done everything in her power to find a doctor capable of curing his illness. And she certainly would have gathered the courage to rebel against her overbearing eldest sister. She should have kept him in the house, kept him as part of the Mu family at any cost. She should have stayed by his side to care for him. But life, as we know, is rarely that simple. Mu Liao had even naively thought that if she just visited him a few more times, he might easily forgive them. She imagined they could perfectly return to the way things were in the past, back to those beautiful moments of practicing the piano together when the next season arrived. But the cruel reality was now staring her directly in the face. An overwhelming sadness began to cloud her vision entirely. Her thoughts became a tangled, confused mess as the weight of it all hit her. Fragments of memories flashed through her mind like scenes from a magic lantern. The next day, Mu Liao remembered the moment he held her hand tightly, watching the night sky under a soft summer breeze. She remembered how, once upon a time, he had stepped in front of her without a moment's hesitation to protect her. The only reason she had achieved her brilliant success was because he had voluntarily hidden in the shadows, letting the glory and applause pass him by. He had left every single opportunity to shine well within her reach. One original song after another went viral across the internet. Just as she had always dreamed, she finally stood on the stage of the industry's most prestigious music awards ceremony. After she delivered her speech, countless media outlets rushed forward, desperate to interview her. A gossip reporter asked pointedly what kind of strength had supported her to reach this height. They asked who she was most grateful for in her heart, and in front of the cameras, she generously thanked many people. In that moment, she had spotted him standing there, right in the middle of the crowd below the stage. After seeing his ordinary and humble appearance, she felt that having such a brother was, quite frankly, embarrassing. And so, not a single word of her speech mentioned him at all. That sharp-eyed reporter noticed the omission and asked about the rumors of a brother she had grown up with, the one who had taught her to play the piano since she was very young. They asked if she had anything to say to him in this moment of absolute glory. But Mu Liao, from beginning to end, felt that her brilliant achievements had nothing to do with him. She simply replied with a cold no, yet he, standing below the stage, showed no resentment and only smiled happily for her. He was content, you see, because his sister was finally receiving the praise of countless people. She whispered to herself that this time, she would protect Mu Chun, even if it cost her her own life. Mu Liao's voice grew hoarse from crying. Seeing a missed call from Mu Yulu, she finally decided to call her back. But before Mu Yulu could even get a word out on the other end of the line, Mu Liao rushed to speak, her voice firm as she admitted that she regretted everything deeply. She insisted she had to bring him back home, leaving Mu Yulu shocked on the other end, demanding to know what nonsense she was talking about. She reminded her that her own little brother had been brutally kicked by him only yesterday. Now she wanted him back. She asked her to consider what Mu Xian would think of such a thing. Mu Liao immediately snapped back, her voice rising in defiance. She asked if he wasn't the same little brother she had watched grow up all those years. If she had to choose between the two of them, she told her sister she would choose Mu Chun without a second thought. She even suggested that Mu Xian had deserved it for being the one to provoke the fight. And if he couldn't accept that, then he could simply pack his things and leave. Hearing this, Mu Yulu was absolutely incensed on the other end of the line. She asked if she had lost her mind, unable to believe the nonsense she was hearing. Everyone in high society already knew they had finally found their biological brother. She asked if she was crazy, wondering how she could even think of throwing him out now. She worried about what people would say, but then Mu Liao's desperate, broken voice came through the receiver. He has an incurable terminal illness, she revealed, and the doctor says he only has a year to live. On the very day he was diagnosed and fell into total despair. This group of ungrateful sisters had thrown him out together. Hearing this, Mu Yulu fell into a deathly silence. Mu Liao naively thought that her older sister would agree to let him return to the family out of guilt. But Mu Yulu said something so cold that no one could have ever predicted it. She simply suggested giving him a bit more money, telling her sister not to bring him back. She told her sister that if she was short on money, she didn't need to say no for that reason. What she wanted was peace for the Mu family, asking if she truly believed letting him return now was a rational or correct choice. We see that Mu Yulu had a very clear plan forming in her mind. She reasoned that if her heart softened and she let him live with them again, Mu Xian, that troublemaker, would surely cause a scene. And if that happened, the entire household would descend into chaos once more. Thinking of this, Mu Yulu managed to calm her irritability just a little bit. She begged Liao to stop being so stubborn, pleading with her to see reason. She reminded her that Mu Xian had already suffered through so many hardships during his years away. She urged her not to do anything that would sadden or disappoint their own little brother. As she made this call, we see Mu Xian standing right there, eavesdropping on every word. When he heard that Mu Liao wanted to throw him out in favor of Mu Chun, he became so furious that his face turned pale and his body began to shake uncontrollably. However, upon hearing the rest, Mu Xian felt the only flaw was that the man he considered a mere actor wasn't dying immediately. He wondered, quite bitterly, why the heavens would still grant him another year of life. These cold words were more than Mu Liao could bear to listen to. She told her sister she didn't agree with her selfish comments in the slightest. After saying this, she firmly pressed the end call button, cutting the connection. At that same moment in the hospital room, Mu Chun regained consciousness in a daze and made a slight sound. Mu Liao reacted instantly, her eyes still red from the tears she had shed. She called out to him, relieved that he had finally woken up. He asked her, quite weakly, if his earlier phone call had interrupted her rest. Deep down, he blamed his sister for everything, and once he had fully regained consciousness, he spoke only one cold sentence to her. He told her to get out immediately, asking who exactly she thought she was pitying. In an instant, Mu Liao's tears began to fall like a cascading waterfall. She told him he was too weak to move and promised that she would leave right away. It was only after watching her finally exit the hospital room that he was able to find a moment of peace. Judging by her erratic behavior in the room, he assumed she already knew about his terminal illness, but he found he no longer cared. He truly wanted nothing more to do with the hospital, while Mu Liao sat in her car, unable to even bring herself to start the engine. At that moment, a strong wind lashed out with torrential rain, quickly covering the windshield in heavy droplets. As she listened to the rhythm of the rain, her sense of sadness only seemed to intensify. She began to long for the rainy years of the past, when she would accompany him all day while he practiced his piano. Back then, as long as he heard her music, he wouldn't feel lonely, but now, that sound was drifting further and further away. Through her tears, Mu Liao reached for her phone, perhaps looking for some kind of connection. She searched for his name online, and as soon as she entered it, a striking headline caught her eye. Zhao Manqi was claiming he was a pervert. Mu Liao clicked it immediately, finding exactly what she feared. It was the same Zhao Manqi who had slandered him so cruelly all those years ago. For some unknown reason, she had revised and republished that long, fabricated article she had invented back then. She even claimed her previous apology had been made under threat and that she had now decided to stop enduring his behavior. To make matters worse, she had even pinned the comment right at the very top for everyone to see. She wrote that if she stayed silent now, no one would be left to defend her when calamity eventually struck again. Even though this had happened a year ago, because of his current internet popularity, Zhao Manqi's post attracted a massive amount of attention. The comments below, naturally, were filled with a wide variety of conflicting points of view. After all, viewers tend to sympathize with those they perceive as weak, even if Zhao Manqi hadn't presented a single shred of evidence. And so, there were still many people who took the opportunity to criticize and attack him. As she watched this unfold, Mu Liao clenched her fists in a silent, growing anger. We recall that the last time he faced this kind of situation, things had gone very differently. Back then, she hadn't cared at all, leaving him to suffer through countless injustices alone. But this time, it seemed she was determined to atone for her past sins. If only to find a little peace of mind, she felt she had to see this matter through to the very end. With that thought in mind, she picked up her phone and dialed Lu Jinmin's number. "Attorney Lu," she began, "I need to trouble you with something rather urgent." She explained that the girl who had slandered him before had started her campaign of lies once again. She sent him the link, and after a quick look, Lu Jinmin promised to contact the person to have the post removed immediately. But Mu Liao was quick to stop him, asking why they would settle for something so simple. They had already given her a chance. Now, she wanted to ensure the girl was sent to prison. She left the matter in his hands, though he asked if she was truly certain she wanted to go that far. He wondered if her older sister knew about this, but Mu Liao didn't hesitate for a single second. She told him her sister knew nothing, and that if anyone asked, he should say it was her own request. Hearing this, Lu Jinmin fell into a thoughtful silence, perhaps sensing the tension. He wondered if the sisters had fought, but since Mu Liao was so insistent, he no longer had any reason to worry. This matter shouldn't be a major problem, or so he thought. He had already gathered a great deal of evidence regarding him some time ago. However, he hadn't wanted to cause a public scandal and preferred to resolve everything privately. So, he hadn't used them, but this time, it seemed they could all finally be put to use. As Mu Liao listened to these words, she suddenly remembered it was Mu Xian who had asked Zhao Manqi to do this. If she were to take Zhao Manqi to court, it would inevitably involve Mu Xian as well. but she quickly dismissed the thought, realizing how poorly she had handled the situation before. In truth, he had already forgotten about the entire ordeal. But lately, Zhao Manqi saw online that the person he once slandered had suddenly become quite popular. And so, his darker intentions surfaced, hoping to use this leverage to extort some money. Zhao Manqi secretly calculated that wealthy people wouldn't mind parting with such a small amount of cash. The matter had been so massive back then, yet it was settled with a simple apology, making the rewards far outweigh the risks. But he wasn't as timid as he used to be, and instead, he responded to him directly regarding the matter. This only made Zhao Manqi angrier, leading him to dig up that long, fabricated article from the past. After a quick revision, he posted it online earlier today. He believed it wouldn't be long before he was contacted to have the post removed. After all, nobody likes to see their reputation dragged through the mud, especially now, considering he has such a large following on the internet. And so, he simply turned on the television and began to wait. Half an hour later, the doorbell suddenly rang. Zhao Manqi assumed his takeout had finally arrived and casually opened the door. But he certainly didn't expect to find 3 police officers standing there waiting for him. "You are Zhao Manqi, correct?" Stunned for a moment, he could do nothing but nod in response. They got straight to the point, asking if he had posted something on the internet earlier that morning. It turned out someone had already provided evidence that he was actively spreading malicious rumors, and so they requested that he accompany them to the station for a formal investigation. At that moment, Zhao Manqi found himself completely paralyzed by shock. He wondered if posting online was truly illegal, but when one invents facts to damage a reputation and the views exceed a certain limit, well, then it very quickly becomes a criminal matter. Upon hearing this, Zhao Manqi began to break out in a cold, nervous sweat. He hurriedly pulled out his phone to check just how popular that post had become. In just half an hour, the numbers had exploded, terrifying him so much that his legs gave out and he collapsed onto the floor. We moved to the police station 30 minutes later, where Lu Jinmin watched as Zhao Manqi was led inside. He stood up to greet him, a calm smile playing across his face. Seeing a familiar face, Zhao Manqi realized the game was up and stopped trying to resist. He sheepishly admitted that the post might have contained a few exaggerated details. He pleaded with lawyer Lu, asking if he could simply delete the post and apologize like he did last time. Hearing this, Lu Jinmin couldn't help but let out a soft, knowing chuckle. That sound made Zhao Manqi's heart skip a beat, and not in a pleasant way. Since he was so willing to admit to spreading rumors, the lawyer decided it was time to tell him the hard truth. The post had already reached over 1 million views, a staggering number, to be sure. "This time, I will be suing you directly." Hearing this, Zhao Manqi finally realized the gravity of his situation. He quietly leaned toward the officer beside him and asked what happens when defamation is considered severe. The officer's response was enough to make him collapse right then and there. If he couldn't obtain a pardon from the other party, it was highly likely he would be sentenced. Desperate, he cried out, asking why they hadn't told him any of this sooner. He had uploaded the post at 9 in the morning, so why were they only coming for him now? He was certain that the lawyer must have seen the post a long time ago. He believed Lu Jinmin had deliberately waited for the post to gain popularity before coming to find him. In his mind, this was nothing more than a calculated trap, which, ironically, he had set for himself. He shouted that he wasn't the one who should be arrested. He insisted that the lawyer was the one who belonged behind bars, but Lu Jinmin offered no explanation. After all, the law was written quite clearly, and he was simply following it. The more evidence one has, the more secure the case. Eloquent words mean very little in court. Besides, the lawyer had felt genuinely aggrieved when he first saw that post after Mu Leiyao's call. The post was already viral, and if his client wanted the man in jail, he would certainly make it happen. The officer nearby immediately reminded him that whatever he said now was completely useless. He explained that this type of case generally isn't reported unless there is a divorce involved. As long as he could obtain a pardon and the lawsuit was withdrawn, everything would be fine. Zhao Manqi found a small ray of hope and was about to apologize, but he soon realized that wouldn't be enough. After all, we see that the other party hadn't paid him any attention at the beginning when he first tried to apologize. So, after thinking for a moment, he dialed his father's number, mostly because he was terrified of being scolded. He recounted the entire situation, though he made sure to minimize the importance of what had actually happened. 10 minutes later, his parents burst through the door, absolutely furious. To be honest, they looked ready for a fight. Because Zhao Manqi had downplayed the matter, his parents believed Lu Jinmin was threatening their child, and their anger reached a breaking point. Finally, after Lu Jinmin stated he would never accept a pardon, the middle-aged couple felt their child had been deeply wronged. And so, in a fit of rage, they rushed forward and began to shove and pull at him. The scene descended into total chaos, and the 2 officers in the room found themselves unable to stop the commotion. Other officers on duty heard the noise and arrived quickly to stabilize the situation before things got even worse. Lu Jinmin, who had been slightly injured in the scuffle, stood there stunned after the police helped him back to his feet. Deep down, he sighed in silence, feeling quite glad about the professional path he had taken. After that definitive turn of events was finally settled, we returned to the hospital where Zheng and the medical staff opened a new door, presenting him with a final, difficult option. It involved injections costing millions per dose, the most advanced cell therapy, and a completely customized treatment plan. The estimated cost would be millions per day, even though the chance of success was minimal, a last psychological comfort for the desperate. Finally, Zhang Hingren comforted him in a low voice, telling him to simply enjoy the world and live his life well. After listening, he left the hospital alone, hearing the heavy rain behind him as he stepped through puddles on the uneven road. Suddenly, he felt very tired, utterly exhausted, if we are being perfectly honest. The tense string in his mind finally snapped, and a profound sense of weakness washed over him. Originally, he thought he could face life and death with calm, but now he discovered he hadn't truly let go of anything. He could see his sister playing hopscotch right there in front of him. She would curl up in his arms to be pampered, calling him brother, just as she always did. He knew his mother would weep the moment she realized his health was failing so rapidly. He finally had a real home, the family affection he had craved countless times, and a girl he loved to his very core. But now, all of this could collapse at any moment, and who could blame him for feeling the weight of it? He didn't want to die like this, and so he crouched helplessly on the ground, overwhelmed by an unbearable pain. It was the deepest desperation, the kind he had kept hidden away in his heart for so long. It spread through him without end, and he found he could no longer suppress it. After he finished crying, he picked up his umbrella, stood back up, and continued his walk toward home. At the intersection, we see the traffic officer still constantly directing the flow of vehicles. It didn't matter how much one person wept, the city remained indifferent, filled with its usual endless traffic. Meanwhile, at the Mu mansion, things were quite different because Mu Xian wanted to eat something new. The menu previously arranged by housekeeper Lu was promptly discarded and altered. After organizing the cooks, a new menu was drafted and the ingredients were completely changed. He then contacted 2 domestic workers to switch the style from Chinese to Western, exactly as Mu Xian had requested. After everyone had been busy for several hours, the dishes were finally served on the table just in time for the meal. Looking at the incredibly delicious beef in front of him, Mu Xian nodded with a sense of smug satisfaction. The ingredients were rich and exquisite, certainly, but that wasn't what he enjoyed most. To be honest, the feeling of giving orders to people satisfied him far more than the food ever could. He popped open a bottle of champagne and poured himself a glass. "Sister, a toast to you," Mu Xian said, raising the crystal glass in his hand. He looked across at Mu Luyao, who sat opposite him, and offered a smile. We see that Mu Luyao's hand was trembling ever so slightly. It was as if Mu Luyao hadn't heard a single word he said. She continued eating her steak in a daze, until Mu Yulu cleared her throat from the side. "Luyao, your brother is speaking to you," she prompted, and Mu Luyao finally spoke. "Besides letting that girl frame me, what else is there to say?" Upon hearing this, Mu Xian's expression froze, and his voice took on a defensive, nasal tone. "Sister, why would you say that? I did something wrong before, but it was truly just one mistake." He insisted that if she didn't believe him, he would go to the police station to prove his innocence. Mu Luyao simply scoffed at the idea, telling him to go ahead and report it then. Suddenly, Mu Yulu slammed her hand on the table. "Enough, stop this nonsense at once." She asked if she really wanted the police to come and start an investigation. Did she no longer care about the reputation of the Mu family? Imagine the scene, the family forcing their youngest brother to call the police just to prove a point. "How long will outsiders laugh at us if word of this gets out?" she demanded. Hearing this, Mu Luyao found the situation more than a little ironic. Am I not also her brother? Didn't she force me to prove my own innocence back then? It seemed that, in the end, the only thing that truly mattered to his eldest sister was the family name. How could she ever allow the police to investigate the Mu family under these circumstances? Mu Xian, of course, must have counted on exactly that before speaking those shameless words. Seeing Mu Luyao fall silent, and noticing his eldest sister hadn't intervened, Mu Xian grew bolder. "Sister Luyao, I know you don't like me, but I truly hope you can get along with our eldest sister and stop arguing on my account." He went on to say that as long as the two of them could find peace, he would move out immediately. As he spoke, Mu Xian seemed moved by his own words, and his eyes grew slightly red. This only made Mu Yulu feel more certain that Mu Luyao was being far too temperamental. "Sister, I know you feel guilty because Mu Chun is ill," he continued. But he insisted that no one wanted this to happen and that it had nothing to do with them. "Sister, I'm going to say something unpleasant today," he added, preparing his next point. He reminded her that they had all decided together, back then, that Mu Chun should leave the family. Upon hearing this, Mu Luyao felt as if her heart were being torn apart. Yes, she thought to herself, why had she been so cowardly back then? She wondered why she hadn't stood her ground instead of becoming an accomplice in his expulsion. Mu Yulu continued her attempts at persuasion, telling Lu Yao to simply let it go. She remarked on how pleasant it was for the family to sit together and eat like this now. Why mention the one who left and cause everyone to feel so miserable? To be honest, her logic was cold. Mu Lu Yao could only manage a bitter smile. How could she possibly let it go? She had given him her whole life. Once again, she chose not to listen to her eldest sister. "I will bring Mu Qin back," she declared. "I want him to come home." She added that if Mu Xian had truly done something harmful, she would investigate every detail to the very bottom. However, at that exact moment, we see a domestic worker approach Mu Xian. She whispered a few words to him, and suddenly, Mu Xian's expression changed drastically. Without warning, he reached out and swept his hand across the table with violent force. The utensils and dishes went flying, crashing onto the floor in a chaotic mess. Wine from the glasses spilled everywhere, staining the scene of their supposed family dinner. Butler Lu, who was standing nearby, could only let out a deep, weary sigh. It seemed there would be quite a lot of work to do in the coming moments. This sudden outburst startled Mu Lu, who asked in shock, "Mu Xian, what is wrong with you?" Mu Xian's eyes were now bloodshot as he pointed a trembling finger at Mu Lu Yao and shouted, "Why did you let Lawyer Lu look for her? You even let him file a lawsuit against her." He panicked, wondering what would happen if Zhao Manqi revealed that he was the one who gave the orders. Mu Lu Yao, seeing him finally show his true face, simply smiled faintly, as if she had expected this all along. "What's going to happen?" she asked calmly. "Whatever the law says is what will happen." She pointed out that if he were truly involved, it would be entirely his own fault. She then asked him if he had bothered to use his brain to think things through while he was doing it. Mu Lu watched the two of them begin to argue, feeling completely confused by the sudden turn of events. After listening for a while, she began to vaguely piece together the reason for the conflict. She called over the maid from before, and her suspicions were quickly confirmed. It all went back to that time when Zhao Manqi had falsely accused her. But deep down, she knew she had to stand by Mu Xian, simply because he was her younger brother. Before their parents passed away, they had left her with a heavy responsibility. She was never to let the Mu family decline in her generation, but rather protect their vast wealth and reputation. And for so many years, Mu Lu had kept that promise close to her heart. To maintain the family's prosperity, she had done many things that went entirely against her own will. These compromises, made against her better judgment, began to pile up like a growing snowball. The more she did, the heavier her heart felt, yet she believed she had no choice but to continue. To her, the rise and fall of the Mu family was the only thing that truly mattered. That is why, after her younger brother Mu Xian disappeared, they chose to adopt a substitute. But since I do not have the Mu family blood flowing through my veins, things were different. This meant that no matter what I did, Mu Lu could never truly change her prejudice toward me. She simply couldn't erase that image of me that was rooted deep in her bones. And so, I lived more like a servant within the Mu family for over 10 long years. The emotions she showed me weren't exactly family affection. It was more like the way one treats a pet. It was the kind of attachment that naturally develops after more than a decade together. In Mu Lu's heart, Mu Xian and I weren't comparable at all, especially when the family reputation was at stake. For the sake of the Mu legacy, she would, of course, always take Mu Xian's side. We return now to the restaurant, where the tension has reached a breaking point. Mu Xian's face was flushed with rage at Mu Lu Yao's words, fearing the legal consequences and a possible prison sentence. To make matters worse, Mu Lu Yao even scolded her for having kicked me out. The rage in Mu Xian's heart was on the verge of turning into pure hatred, yet he simply didn't dare point his finger at the people inside the restaurant. Deep down, Mu Xian was terrified that doing so might actually make Mu Lu uncomfortable. Instead, Mu Xian began to smash everything around him, desperately venting the anger that was consuming him. Butler Lu, who stood to the side watching this chaotic scene unfold, had a face clouded with deep sadness. He thought of the scented candle storage, which surely should have had enough stock to avoid this. Then there was that valuable coffee machine, an antique model that is certainly not easy to replace these days. He estimated that even deciding on the manual repairs would likely take at least 2 full days. And that expensive piece of porcelain, just as the butler was about to shout a warning, Mu Xian had already hoisted it high into the air. It was the very piece of porcelain placed in the most visible spot in the entire restaurant. Then, he slammed it down with all his might. With a deafening crash, the fragments scattered across the floor, a total loss, naturally. Seeing this, Butler Lu sighed silently to himself, knowing that things were about to take a turn for the worse. Just as he hesitated over whether to intervene, Mu Lu Yao had already lunged forward and delivered a sharp slap. It wasn't until he felt a burning, stinging pain on the inside of his cheek that the reality set in. Mu Xian realized, with a shock, that he had actually been struck. Seeing that she seemed ready to strike again, he recoiled, covering his cheek and doing his best to look small and pitiful. Mu Lu immediately stepped forward to shove Mu Lu Yao aside, firmly shielding Mu Xian behind her back. She demanded an apology for her brother, while Mu Lu Yao stumbled back 2 steps from the force of the push. Between the porcelain being ruthlessly shattered and the fact that her older sister had actually pushed her, Mu Lu Yao felt incredibly wronged. She began to cry inconsolably, sobbing that the vase was a precious gift given to her by Mr. Su. She tried to explain that she didn't care about the rest, but Mu Lu had absolutely no intention of backing down. "Lu Yao, just how much longer are you going to keep acting out like this? Do you really think your brother did it on purpose? Tomorrow, I'll have Butler Lu buy you 10 more. Right now, you are going to apologize to your brother immediately." She wasn't joking in the slightest, and seeing this, Mu Xian quickly managed to squeeze out 2 tears. "Sister Lu Yao, I'm so sorry. I had no idea this piece of porcelain was so important to you. Big sister, it's all my fault. Sister Lu Yao, it's perfectly fine if you want to hit me. Mu Yulu looked at Mu Xian's reddened cheek with a pained expression, then stepped forward and firmly gripped Mu Lu Yao's wrist. He is your own younger brother. Mu Lu Yao didn't even realize what was happening, but her body instinctively recoiled. Losing her balance, she fell to the floor, and as we watch this scene, a look of pure panic flashes across Mu Yulu's face. Lu Yao, sister really didn't do that on purpose. Get up quickly, get up. But the hand she reached out was roughly shoved away by the other girl. Does he leave, or do I? In that moment, there was nothing but pure disgust in her eyes as she looked at Mu Xian. That was from Mr. Su. Sister, I don't care about the rest. It was the only gift he ever gave me. It might even be the last. Thinking of this, Mu Lu Yao began to sob inconsolably once again. In the past, every time her birthday came around, she would receive gifts she had carefully prepared herself. But she never took them seriously. Mu Yulu felt as though she were about to collapse upon hearing this, her eyes filling with tears. Lu Yao, why would you say such things? He is your younger brother, and you are his older sister. Mu Xian, also slumped on the floor, could no longer hide the venom swirling in her eyes. Why doesn't she just die right now? She hated Mu Lu Yao for helping a stranger snatch away the pride she had worked so hard to gain. Mu Xian was filled with so much hatred that her teeth were actually trembling. To be honest, it was a chilling sight. In this moment, she truly wanted the two of them to simply die together. Lu Yao, stop throwing these tantrums. Sister, I won't even take the ball from you. I apologize. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all just live together as a family? Why must it always be like this? Please, do not argue with Mu Xian anymore in the future. Our Mu family has raised him for 20 years, after all. Was she serious? Did they truly feel sorry? Mu Yulu covered her forehead, nursing a growing headache. And right at that moment, Mu Xian decided to add more fuel to the fire. Big sister, it is all my fault. All the mistakes are mine. It's only natural for Sister Lu Yao to be angry, since she disliked it so much. I will leave this house right now. I'll go to the police station to atone for my past mistakes. Mu Lu Yao didn't hesitate. She pulled out her mobile phone immediately. Keep acting, don't stop on my account. First, I'll have lawyer Lu come over to prepare some contracts. I'll remove you from the family registry first, and then I'll personally escort you to the police station. Let's see how you atone for your sins. Mu Yulu saw that the relationship had soured to the point where only one could remain. In reality, she collapsed right there, her eyes overflowing with tears. Lu Yao, why must you push things to this extreme? Do you not care at all about the reputation of the Mu family? Mu Lu Yao shouted back, her own emotions finally boiling over. Chin-yi, just throw me out, exactly like you threw out Mu Chen before. Meanwhile, we see him board a bus and find a quiet seat by the window to sit down. He sat there, gazing at the sky through the window. After hearing the words of his doctor, Zhang Jinran, he had found yet another reason to earn more money. Even though that specific treatment plan offered only a slim chance of success, earning more money was always a viable way forward. His previous 2 piano compositions had already sold for 4 million, and 2 other songs had been sold to Xia Yuxuan for 3 million. This amount should be more than enough to finally improve their living conditions. Besides, just last night, he discovered that his younger sister's teacher was completely unethical and had been targeting her at every turn. Because of this, he was planning to discuss a few things with his mother over the next few days. As he watched the clouds, he thought of the doctor's words and his 3 million. He was determined to move his sister to a better primary school soon. As for that teacher who gave secret private lessons, once his sister had safely transferred, he intended to find a lawyer to give her a little surprise. He estimated that after taking care of all these matters, nearly 1 million would be spent. And so, we see him send another message to Xia Yuxuan. He asked if he had time for a meal, mentioning that he had written a few more songs while staying in the hospital ward. He offered to show them to him while they were together to see if they might be suitable. Before long, Xia Yuxuan replied with a few warm greetings. After that, he asked several times just to confirm if he was actually being serious or simply joking with him. Once he received an affirmative response from our protagonist, Xia Yuxuan agreed to the meeting without a moment's hesitation. After turning off his mobile phone screen, he felt a sudden, heavy wave of exhaustion wash over him. Zhang Jinran had warned him, of course, that this was a perfectly normal reaction after taking the new medication. A short nap would be enough, he told himself, as he drifted off into a light, restless sleep. After the bus had traveled through a few more stops, the number of passengers began to increase gradually. He had only just fallen into a light sleep when a shrill, piercing sound suddenly jolted him awake. Young man, this is a priority seat for the elderly, the weak, the sick, and pregnant women. A middle-aged woman looked around and, perhaps sensing he was the easiest target, walked directly over to his side. He had been riding buses for many years, of course, and he knew exactly how this usually went. To be honest, he had encountered many people like this before, some even more entitled than her. He had met many unreasonable people who claimed that refusing to give up a seat was a grave moral failing. If it were truly for an elderly person in need, it would have made perfect sense to him. But this woman appeared to be only in her mid-40s, which is hardly the twilight of one's life. Seeing that he seemed to be ignoring her completely, the woman immediately grew anxious and irritable. Young man, I am talking to you. Are you old, weak, sick, or perhaps disabled? I have my senior card right here in my hand. This seat belongs to me by right. Without a word, he pulled out the medical report he had just printed at the hospital and handed it to her. He told her calmly that he was in the terminal stage of cancer and had only just woken from a coma. The woman took the report instinctively, but upon hearing those words, she felt a heavy wave of guilt strike her chest. And naturally, his quiet explanation was heard by many of the people standing around them. Suddenly, the judgmental gazes of the other passengers shifted and fell squarely upon the middle-aged woman. Feeling the weight of their stares, she realized she had completely lost face in front of everyone. She didn't offer an apology, however, she simply stood there in silence, looking away. When the bus finally reached his stop, she watched through the window as he walked away, coughing weakly. Suddenly, she felt a sharp, overwhelming urge to slap herself across the face. She felt utterly despicable. Meanwhile, we see Myukin arrive at a lively street food stall. He ordered several delicious dishes and sat down to wait for Xia Yuxuan to arrive for their meeting. 20 minutes later, Xia Yuxuan's car pulled up smoothly to the side of the road. There was the luxury sports car, worth millions, and then there was the woman who stepped out of it. She was a beauty whose elegance couldn't be hidden even by sunglasses, instantly drawing the gaze of every passerby. Xia Yuxuan spotted him immediately as he waved his hand to catch her attention. As she walked over, her eyes fell upon a small stool that looked a bit greasy and stained. After hesitating for a few seconds, and who could blame her, really, she sat down anyway. She had seen Myukin riding a bicycle before, so she knew he wouldn't be inviting her to a fancy restaurant. But this environment was a bit much. She even noticed flies buzzing over the ingredients at the neighboring stall. This made it quite difficult for her to accept, accustomed as she was to pristine, high-end dining. And so, she had already mentally prepared herself to go hungry for the evening. "Master Myukin, are you feeling all right now?" she asked, and he assured her he was fine. He explained that the doctors had prescribed him some new medications to manage his condition. With any luck, he shouldn't suffer another sudden fainting spell like the one before. This new medicine was very expensive, which was why he had come back to work so hard to earn money. Upon hearing this, Xia Yuxuan was momentarily stunned, frozen right there on the spot. She realized that his first thought was the desperate need to secure funds for his treatment. And only then did he begin the grueling process of writing new songs. If this was truly the case, then his talent was simply staggering. "That's good to hear," she replied, admitting she had been quite frightened when he fainted. Naturally, she began to feel a growing curiosity about the quality of these new songs. "Master Myukin, where are the songs you've been writing?" she asked. Just then, the owner placed their order on the table, and Myukin immediately served himself a plate of egg-fried rice. After that, he served Xia Yuxuan a full plate, even pressing the rice down firmly with a spoon. He told her everything was ready and that he'd written plenty while waiting, but insisted she eat first. Xia Yuxuan looked down at the plate of fried rice with a rather uncomfortable expression. She accepted it with both hands out of politeness and thanked him, though she had no intention of actually using her chopsticks. Myukin, for his part, simply began devouring large mouthfuls of the rice. He then picked up his pen and paper to continue writing between bites, a sight that, strangely enough, started making Xia Yuxuan feel hungry. And so, she began to look over the options on the table with great care. She hesitated more than once before finally choosing a skewer of stinky tofu. As Xia Yuxuan took a bite of the hot tofu, her eyes widened slightly in surprise. The flavor was actually quite good. She found the taste truly impressive, though she eventually set the skewer aside to try something else. Next, she decided to sample the fish balls he had been eating just moments before. The moment she tasted them, her eyes lit up. It was almost frustrating how delicious they were. By then, Myukin had already finished the third song and handed it over to her. Xia Yuxuan quickly set down the grilled skewer she had just picked up. She took the pages with both hands and began to look through them with absolute focus. After reviewing these 3 songs, Xia Yuxuan felt certain that there couldn't possibly be any mistake. She wondered if she was meant to be the next Master Su of Muliao, a thought that brought back memories of her first meeting with him. We see the memory clearly. Muliao was sitting there, speaking with an air of immense pride. He boasted about knowing all the great masters, like Fong and Wang, claiming they had all promised to write songs just for him. At that time, looking at his confidence, she had been absolutely filled with envy.